Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Isabella of France. Back in 1313, Isabella, the daughter of King Philip IV of France, made a gift for a group of noblewomen that her brothers were marrying. She gifted the three women these embroidered purses, and as it turns out, these gifts would soon lead to their demise. Basically, the following year after giving these gifts, Isabella spotted two of these purses in the possession of a pair of knights. Can probably already see where this is going, but of course Isabella was suspicious of this now, so she passed on the information to her father. From here, he had people watch the wives of his sons as a sort of investigation. Soon, two of the wives were found guilty of adultery with the knights, and it was discovered that an old guard tower acted as their secret meeting place. The women were placed into prison for the rest of their lives, and the men met gruesome fates that ensured they paid for their disloyalty. This had lasting repercussions, however, because with their wives in prison, the king's sons now didn't produce any male heirs before they passed away, and thus the 100 Years' War was born when the son of Isabella, Edward III of England, attempted to claim the French throne. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Prince of Brunei. Brunei's prince, Geoffrey Bolkiah, is the brother to the Sultan, and a few years ago he found himself in quite the scandal. Basically, in 1997, Shannon Marketic accused the prince and the Sultan of flying her and many others to Brunei under false pretenses. In this scandal, everyone escaped any kind of charges due to diplomatic immunity. Then we moved to 2000, where the Sultan himself sued his brother for apparently embezzling $14.8 million from the Brunei Investment Agency, which is in charge of things like their oil revenues. While he denies the charges, he agreed to hand over a number of his personal belongings to the government in exchange for avoiding criminal prosecution and being allowed to stay at his residence. This was quite messy for the outwardly luxurious prince, but since then, it doesn't seem as though any major scandals have come to light, and the Sultan remains one of the last absolute monarchs in the world. In our number 8 spot today, we have Ferdinand I. The King of Naples from 1458 to 1494, Ferdinand was looked on quite fairly as a leader, but he was also known for being quite a ruthless leader in a lot of aspects as well. He was 35 years old when he came into power, and in 1485 he was faced with a revolt among the nobility. Ferdinand quickly put a stop to this, but promised the nobility a general amnesty before later turning against them and executing a number of them. For the most significant offenders against Ferdinand, however, he had quite a specific treatment for them. After their slaying, the king would have these enemies embalmed, dressed, and then posed in his quote black museum. This seems like a weird hobby you probably would want to keep hidden, but not Ferdinand. He loved it and was so proud of it. He would even take his guests on a tour of the place if he suspected that they may be treacherous.
At number 7, killer date. What is the worst date that you've ever been on? What kinds of weird people have you met through your dating history? I'm sure there are some pretty wild and crazy stories out there, but I'm guessing that very few of them would even come close to the insane dating story from Princess Beatrice and how she literally dated a killer. In 2006, when Princess Beatrice was 17 years old, she got into a relationship with an American playboy named Paolo Luzzo. Paolo was an arguably shady guy, judging by the fact that he was arrested on a manslaughter charge before getting with Beatrice. Paolo was accused of ending the life of 19-year-old Jonathan Duchalier after beating the guy to death. Yeah, what a catch, right? Shockingly, Paolo's charges were reduced to a less severe charge, and he still got to date a princess after all of this. He even broke his probation to go on a trip to the French Alps with Princess Beatrice. How he finessed life so hard, I have no idea, but either way, their relationship only lasted a short amount of time. I can't say it's a good look for a member of the royal family to be seen with someone with such a dark past.
In our number 6 spot today, we have Sophia Dorothea. Daughter of the Duke of Brunswick-Luneburg, she was betrothed to her first cousin, George. Now, history says that George wasn't the most attractive man with the nickname Pig Snout, but George was in quite a position where he was potentially the heir to 2 thrones, so of course the Duke agreed to hand his daughter over in hopes of her securing a crown. Princess Sophia obviously did not like this and apparently fainted when she heard of the betrothal in 1682. The marriage did go through, but things went downhill quite quickly and turned very violent. Flash forward to the time when Count von Königsmarck arrived from Sweden, and suddenly Sophia had a new interest. Not long after his arrival, the pair were having quite the affair that wasn't exactly as discreet as you might have assumed. The pair made a plan to run away together and make a new life far, far away from Pig Snout. Unfortunately, however, the night before the pair were supposed to run off, the Count just disappeared. There are plenty of theories of what might have happened to the Count, including a jealous former lover and of course George. In the end, the rumors were swirling and George was super mad about it, so he divorced Sophia, took the kids and sent her to be imprisoned in a small castle on the lake. In the end, George went on to become King George I of England and he left Sophia behind. In our number 5 spot today, we have the black outfit. Another travel rule that the royal family must follow is in regards to an item that they have to bring with them on all trips, whether business or pleasure. It is pretty unusual to see the royal family dressed in black, despite when a specific occasion calls for it, but every time they travel, they're required to bring an all-black outfit with them. This is to prepare for the worst case scenario. If they are away on a trip and somebody important to them passes away, they need to ensure that they are ready with the appropriate clothing for when they're able to touch down on their home soil. This is of course very practical, but it's definitely kind of morbid. I mean, you're having to fuss over what you're gonna wear when you're actually just mourning the loss of someone close to you. It certainly wouldn't be the top of my list of things to focus on, but maybe that's why I'm not cut out for royalty. Okay. In our number 4 spot today, we have Atahualpa and Huascar. These two were the two sons of the Inca king, but when he passed away in 1527, the kingdom was left to the sons, but their joint rule did not turn out so well. By 1529, war had broken out and things were going downhill. What would later become known as the War of the Two Brothers saw many horrors, and apparently one brother at one point made a drinking cup out of the skull of one of the other brother's generals. The civil war that the two started would definitely speed up the downfall of the civilization, but things met an even crazier end. Just as Atahualpa seemed close to declaring his victory in 1532, Francisco Pizarro's Spanish conquistadors showed up and captured him to hold him for ransom. During this time, he was still able to get out a message to execute his brother. In the end, while he outlived his brother, it wouldn't be by much because he was then executed by the Spanish in 1533.
Number 3. Prince Harry costume party. YouTube isn't a fan of some words, specifically one word that rhymes with Yahtzee, and it goes deep with history, as you could assume what I'm talking about. But with this being one of the biggest scandals, I have to bring it up, right? The Duke was always referred to as a bad boy, right? He was the bad royal. The bad boil royal. I don't know, I'm trying new shit here. But just how deep did these incidents cut? Well, before he settled down with Meghan in 2018, Harry had to issue a public apology back in 2005 because, whoops, somebody got photos from a costume party, and a few of them were in poor taste. Did the royal dress up as the Beast from Beauty and the Beast? No, he did not. Did he dress up like a witch? Like a little witch, maybe with a nice witch broom? No, none of that either. No, photos leaked of him wearing World War II German soldier gear. Yeah, I can't say too much, but it was even equipped with an armband, a very bad armband. Again, I can't say too much, nor will YouTube allow us to show too much, but you understand what I'm trying to say. You remember. It was poor taste. He could have dressed up in any way he wanted. He's a literal prince. And he does this? It's off-putting. Harry said afterwards, and I quote, "I am very sorry if I caused any offense or embarrassment to anyone. It was a poor choice of costume and I apologize." End quote. Nice, right from the heart. That's good. Really goes deep with the royal history. We love it.
In our number 2 spot today, we have the Wanli Emperor. The 13th emperor of China's Ming Dynasty, Wanli had many relations with women. He is said to have had 2 official consorts and a number of concubines, but one of these ladies was clearly his favorite, Lady Zheng. She had 2 sons, and one of them, Wanli, really wanted to be his successor. Unfortunately, this son was the 3rd of his children, so his ministers and those around him wouldn't allow it. They believed he wasn't the proper heir. In the end, the first son of Wanli, who was born to consort Lady Wang, was declared the crown prince. This is when the emperor decided that since he didn't have his way, he was just gonna quit working. Prior to this entire dilemma, Wanli was looked upon as a great ruler. He worked hard and he handled the threats to the empire very quickly. This was all extremely contradictory to the final 20 years of his reign, where he apparently just started ignoring meetings and royal duties. This is why many historians actually place a lot of the blame for the downfall of the Ming Dynasty in 1644 to this sort of passive-aggressive protest. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have Joan of Kent. Joan of Kent lived during the 14th century in England, and she was known as being one of the most beautiful women in all of England. She was said to be quite loving, but it is also said that she had quite a whirlwind and controversial love life. So So basically, Joan was only 12 when she had her first marriage. I know it's horrifying now, but this was the practice at the time. And she married a knight named Tom Holland. But when Tom went off to war, Joan was approached by another man, the son of the Earl of Salisbury, who asked for her hand in marriage. Despite the whole Tom situation, she said yes, because at the time there was no way for anyone to know who would be coming back from battle, and she just assumed that Tom had died. It was of course quite the shock to everyone when Tom ended up returning, very much alive, to find out about all of this. A legal battle followed which Tom ended up winning, and him and Joan went on to raise 4 children. After his passing, however, Joan would go on to marry again, to the dismay of many people, but this time she married the son of King Edward III, and she went on to become the first Princess of Wales.
Not so British after all. If you're like me, then you're most likely not gonna be royalty. Although being a prince would be pretty cool, I just don't have the pure bloodline to be royalty, but neither does the Queen of England. When you think of old Blighty and her royal throne, you think of pure British descent, but you'd be wrong. The House of Windsor is actually Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, which, if you couldn't tell, doesn't exactly scream tea and crumpets. The German-sounding name became an issue in the early 20th century due to the First World War breaking out against 2-time war loser Germany. Britain needing to inspire its citizens to defeat Germany, which at the time it was really anyone's game, so to help inspire the people, King George V changed the name to Windsor. After all, it's kinda difficult to fight someone when you have more in common than differences. Not to mention that there were a lot of Germanic influences around, so really, it was a bad look and a great marketing decision.
At number 9, Charles the Tampon? Yeah, we're getting weird. Relationships are kind of weird. I mean, they can be great, don't get me wrong, but they have a weird side too. Every couple is different and they have their thing. Some have a show that they like to watch together, others have their songs, and some have little sayings that they've come up with. But those are the more tame quirks that some couples have. Others, however, can get very bizarre, but many of them probably can't add up to the strange things that have been said between Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles. As we all know, Prince Charles was first married to Princess Diana, and it's no secret that they had a pretty tough relationship. Theirs was certainly not a happy marriage, and they each had their own affairs with other people while they were married. During their marriage, Charles was still pretty hung up on Camilla, the woman he was told he couldn't have, and who was also married to someone else. This minor obstacle, however, didn't stop them from getting freaky, at least over the phone. In 1992, the year that Charles and Diana announced their separation, a steamy phone conversation between Charles and Camilla was leaked, and it was super weird. In the call, Charles was simping like no other, saying things like how he wished he could live in Camilla's pants as a pair of panties, and even expressed his desire to be Camilla's tampon. Like what? Charles, stop it. Ew. This leak became a scandal called Tampongate, and as you can imagine, this wasn't good for the royals. But I guess it still kind of worked out for Charles, since after all that he finally got the girl he wanted and perhaps got to live out his dream of being a box of Tampax or something. I don't know. I really don't want that mental image. Moving on.
Number 8. Comrade Cousin? King George V and Tsar Nicholas II were rulers of vast empires in the early 20th century. You'd think the similarities between these two monarchs end there, but in reality, these two royal men were much closer than the public thought. Georgie and Nikki were first cousins. That's right, first cousins. Even though their respected empires were culturally different and separated by hundreds of miles, the two men were immediate family. Looking at images of the royals together doesn't require a DNA test to understand that they're related. They look identical and could easily be mistaken for twins. Unfortunately for Nicholas, when the Russian Revolution was in full swing, the Romanov family went into isolation after Nicholas abdicated his throne. While there were attempts to thwart the coup. Nikki's cousin wasn't the best aid. Just goes to show you that sometimes you can't rely on a guy who looks exactly like you because royalty has pretty messed up bloodlines.
In our number 7 spot today, we have Louis XIV. During the reign of Louis XIV, poison was one of those things you just really had to worry about. It was on the rise as an easy and sneaky way to take people out and change the course of inheritance and influence. Because of the worries surrounding possible poisonings and stories of people close to the king doing some shady stuff, investigations began. It was soon found out that the king's chief mistress, the Marquis de Montespan, was said to be quite the client of Catherine Monvoisin. Catherine was a Parisian salesperson who sold powders and potions that were meant to catch the attention of the king. You know, love potion stuff. But among these love potion stories were also stories of horrifying rituals and rites of practice in order to get these alleged powers. These stories, of course, terrified the king, and this led to him ordering for Catherine to be burned at the stake, and not only this, but hundreds of others were implicated as well. Some passed from the conditions they were being held under, others were executed, and some saw punishments that spared their lives, but their reputations were forever tarnished. For the chief mistress, however, well, although she was connected to this entire ordeal, she was the mother of several of the king's children, and because of this close connection to the king, she wasn't arrested or tried. Instead, though, she was retired and sent to a convent to live the rest of her life.
Number 6. The Princess. The tragic loss of Princess Diana affected not only the UK but people around the globe. She was known for her courage and her willingness to help those in need, and had the nerve to speak her mind. Her shocking demise isn't met without controversy. In fact, it may be the biggest controversy of the royal family. There is some evidence that points in the direction that the royal family was behind her death. Diana had proclaimed to her guards that her car was having issues, and even stated in a private letter to her butler that she had some reasonable fear that her life was in danger. In a nutshell, the royal family disapproved of the princess's new lover, even though Charles had clearly been up to no good himself. So in order for Charles to remarry and stop the gutter storm in the tabloids that Diana was going to create, they maybe sort of organized the accident that did end her life. Well, good thing that's over, and after this, there won't be any more controversy for the family, right?
Number 5. Meghan Markle, solo strut. Okay, back in May 2018, we all set our alarms, we woke up early, and we all watched the royal wedding, right? We sipped our tea in our pajamas and we pretended like we were there, right? Just watching, along with the other billions of people online. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, his new Duchess. At the historic wedding, Thomas Markle was just a no-show. Yeah, Meghan just walked down that aisle by herself in front of a billion people, watching at home or streaming it, and it was thought at the time that this was because of Thomas's health. See, right before the wedding, Thomas suffered a heart attack, right? Just days before. So of course nobody was upset. It was almost expected for him not to show up. But cut to a year later, we began talking again. Thomas and the Duchess are now not close, it seems. Thomas even spoke out against his own daughter at one point. There was a huge scandal where Meghan even spoke to Oprah, like Oprah and that big tell-all, and Meghan actually said to her father, if you tell me the truth about working with paparazzi, we can help. And he wasn't able to do that, and for me, has really resonated, especially now as a mother, end quote. So yeah, they're not talking, I guess, anymore, which more than fair. If my dad was working with the paparazzi, showing them private letters, I'd be a little pissed too. There's no way though, the guy can't even unlock his email, let alone sending one, no way.
Number 4. Party time. British royals are people of high esteem, morals, and cut from a higher quality of cloth. So when members of the royal family are seen partying too hard, well, it's a bad look. Prince George, Duke of Kent, was one such royal. He became known for spending his evenings in the best hotels and ballrooms that money could buy, even sometimes wandering into venues that were a tad tawdry even by today's standards. What's more interesting than that is the prince living the life of a frat boy is that his promiscuous relationship with not only just women, but men as well. Add in substance abuse issues that would make Charlie Sheen blush, and you've got yourself one wild prince. Yet again, there's some private letters that seem to support such wild accusations. Unfortunately, he passed away in a plane crash that is shrouded in mystery, and the royal family is suspected of having a hand.
In our number 3 spot today, we have the armed forces. This is a tradition or system that comes into play when a new monarch comes into power. So last year this happened with the king after the passing of the queen. It is definitely one of the most intimidating parts of his new role, and this is that King Charles now becomes the head of the armed forces. This means that it is his responsibility, and he is the only person who can declare when the country is at war and when the war is over. Of course, he won't be doing this entirely alone. He needs to follow the advice and guidance of the government. The perhaps good news is that the new king has held quite close ties to the armed forces throughout his life, even spending time in the Royal Navy and taking flying instruction from the Royal Air Force during his second year at Cambridge University. Of course, the hope is that he won't have to be in a position to make these difficult decisions, but when or if he's faced with them, we can hope he makes the proper decisions for the country.
Number 2. Stepbro? Yeah, I know it's gross, but the truth of the matter is none of us would be here if it wasn't for a little inbreeding. Royals just tend to turn that dial up to 11. Back in ye olde times, bloodlines had to be maintained, and the only way to keep them pure was to marry cousins and have children. Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip are both related to Queen Victoria, but the crazy bus doesn't stop here. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert were first cousins. and they had 9 children together. This is a tradition that all royal families practice. Of course, marriage back then was more of a business decision or a political one. It's why certain distant cousins end up ruling different monarchies and empires. Sure, I get it. Why cross the street when you can cross the hall? But at some point, you gotta run out of cousins. Let's just be glad this practice is of the past and stays in the past.
At number 1, long lost family. The royal family is known for trying to make themselves look perfect in the eyes of the public. They are always trying to look poised and put together and without flaws, but this effort also comes with its dark side, and there's a dark royal secret that just shows the lengths that they have gone to make people think that they are all just perfect people of society. It turns out that the queen had secret cousins that very few people knew about. The royal family and everyone adjacent are very well-known people, so how did we not know about the queen's cousins? Well, that's because they were essentially shunned and shipped off elsewhere because of their mental states. Back in the 1940s, mental disabilities were not very understood and were often seen as embarrassing for the families of the people who had whatever disability. The royal family thought that these cousins, Nerissa and Catherine, were too embarrassing for the royal family to keep around, so they had them incarcerated in a mental institution and they remained there for the rest of their lives, cut off from the rest of the royal family. It is said that no members of the family ever came to visit them. Now that is not a way to treat family.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the Kensington system. Queen Victoria's reign began in 1837 and it lasted up until her death in 1901. She was just 18 years old when she found herself on the throne, and it was all by chance, as she was actually 5th in line when she was born. This is all stressful enough, but certainly one of the worst parts of her upbringing was being brought up under the Kensington system. This basically all started when her mother, Duchess Victoria of Kent, created this system in order to control her daughter, literally just isolated her away from all of her friends and even from other family members, and apparently this was done to keep her quote-unquote pure. The Duchess would monitor her every move, she would decide who she could see and who she could speak to, and Victoria only had 2 friends she could play with growing up, one being her half-sister and the other being her mother's attendant, Sir John Conroy. Victoria was even forced to share a room with her mother until she was queen. She couldn't even walk down the hall by herself. In the end, Victoria placed a lot of blame on John Conroy for manipulating her mother. She even called him the demon incarnate. In our number 9 spot today, we have the royal affairs. There have been many rumors over the years about the royal family and their extramarital affairs. Okay, I'm not saying it's a tradition, but it happens a lot, and I'm saying this goes way back. So far back that one of the first accusations of this within the royal family dates all the way back to Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. Since then, it has only continued with people such as Princess Margaret and Peter Townsend, Princess Anne and Commander Timothy Lawrence, and of course King Charles and Queen Consort Camilla, just to name a few. The latter of those definitely being the most famous, especially when the now king was confronted about it by his wife at the time, the beloved Princess Diana. Apparently, King Charles responded to the confrontation by saying, quote, "Well, I refuse to be the only Prince of Wales who never had a mistress." Maybe not the attitude to keep when you're speaking to your wife, who you're cheating on. I don't know. Guess I'm just not royal enough to get it. In our number 8 spot today, we have pets. As we all know very well, image is everything for the royal family, and that is down to the finest, smallest detail, including pets. It is well known that the queen absolutely loved corgis, and how could we possibly blame her? Apparently, however, if a dog is not a corgi or a Labrador, it is socially looked down upon. Can't describe how insane that is. They're dogs. If you brought a dog who had just been rolling around in the mud everywhere with you, I could see why that wouldn't be as widely accepted among fancy social circles, but only giving the choice of a few random breeds seems kind of ridiculous. Apparently, Meghan Markle actually had to give up her beagle named Guy a few years ago before she joined the family, and then left it. I guess she can probably have whatever dog she wants now, so there's always an upside.
Number 7. A fateful turn of events. Queen Victoria. Her reign began back in 1837 and it lasted until the Queen's death in 1901. Now, at just age 18, Alexandrina Victoria had to rise up to the throne. Had to, right? All these cases, it's like, yeah, they have to do this. She was born, of course, on May 24th, 1819, and Queen Victoria was actually 5th in line when she was born, nowhere near the throne. So right off the bat, it was actually highly unlikely that she would ever see the crown. But one by one, all of her family members began passing away fast. In 4 years, 3 of Victoria's cousins passed away, and then her father and her grandfather both died 1 week apart from one another. So On one hand, obviously it's sad, it's tragic, everyone's dealing with loss so fast. But on the other hand, by the time 1830 rolled around, Victoria was only 11 years old, and already she was next up to bat for the throne at 11. You imagine? That's like some ancient Egypt.
In our number 6 spot today, we have never travel in pairs. This is one travel rule that certainly makes sense, but it is really dark when you think about it. This rule is one that the British royal family, and honestly many people who can afford this sort of luxury safety, do nowadays. This tradition and rule is one that means that any heirs to the throne are not allowed to travel together. This is of course in case some sort of accident happens. Not every heir to the throne would be injured or perhaps killed. It's definitely very smart and sensible, but it has got to be grim, just constantly preparing for the worst thing to happen. It is of the utmost importance to the royal family that they preserve the line to the throne. Like I mentioned before, however, other people are now taking a page out of the royal book and are using this travel rule where possible. In our number 5 spot today, we have Marie Antoinette. In 1783, an artist painted a portrait of Marie Antoinette. This would go on to become one of the most scandalous royal portraits of all time because of the dress that she was wearing. The dress, a gall, wasn't the regular restrictive court dress, and instead was something that the queen would normally wear as she strolled around the grounds of Versailles privately. This comfortable dress, however, was a little bit too scandalous for the public at the time because it resembles a form of undergarment worn to protect expensive clothing. Basically, to the public, it looked like the queen had just been painted in her underwear. Not only were people upset that she didn't upkeep this sort of mystique of luxury and royalty, but the fabric the gown was made from was also quite controversial. The cotton dress was heavily associated with the slave trade and was looked on as a British fabric, which was horrible for a French queen to be wearing. The painting was quickly taken down, but the damage was already done. Within the next decade, the queen would meet her demise at the hands of the guillotine. In our number 4 spot today, we have the rules of the road. Okay, this like rule or tradition or law, I guess, is probably one of the craziest things I've ever heard, but I guess it's been around for quite a while and I just had no idea. As it turns out, the monarch is the only person in the UK who is allowed to drive without a legal license or even license plates. Like, that's insane. I didn't expect the king to have to take a driver's test like everyone else, but just having a rule that allows them, if they chose to drive without any idea how? It's pretty bizarre. The good news is though, which makes this rule make a lot more sense, is that of course rather than driving himself, King Charles' chauffeur will be much more responsible for most of the driving for the king. Let's just hope the chauffeur has their driver's license. I'm not gonna lie, there's this like silly photo of the queen, and every time I think about like the monarch driving without a license, I just think of this like little photo. She's got like a little silly grin on her face. She looks mischievous. And that's what I like to think, her just driving with no license.
Foreshadowing much?
At number 3, the milkman's son. By far the most scandalous royal relationship of modern times was without a doubt Prince Charles and Princess Diana's marriage. We all know how messy their relationship was with the love triangle, the affairs, and Diana's confessions of how tough it was to be married to Charles. But one of the other pretty juicy secret scandals that surrounded the couple was the speculation that the couple's youngest son, Prince Harry, wasn't even Prince Charles's biological kid. In a tell-all interview with Princess Diana in 1995, she admitted to having had a 5-year-long affair with a military man named James Hewitt. After Diana's passing, people started speculating that perhaps this James character was actually Harry's biological dad. I mean, when you take a side-by-side look at James and Harry, their resemblance is pretty uncanny. James denied all allegations and the royal family did the same, but this still remains one of those royal secrets that I'm sure everyone believes but just won't admit.
In our number 2 spot today, we have no touching. There is a rule that you just cannot touch a royal. I'm sure there's a multitude of reasons for this, mostly to do with security, but aside from a very lucky handshake, you really are supposed to keep your distance. I suppose it's because I live the life of a regular person, but I kind of feel like in some ways this might be a little sad. I feel like you might be lacking in so much connection with a ton of interesting people, and like some of the people that you meet, wouldn't you just be dying to hug them? You know, apparently this is part of the reason why the queen always wore gloves. She of course shook a lot of hands while making her royal appearances, and the same will likely go for the new king. Maybe he'll take up gloves as a fashion accessory, just like his mother. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the church. So we talked about the armed forces, and King Charles won't only be the head of the armed forces, but he will also become the head of the church in England. Quite a jump from talking about war and being the one who makes those kinds of decisions to being the head of the church. age, where things hopefully are quite the opposite. This is a post that British monarchs have held since the church was founded by King Henry VIII in the 1500s, and it appears as though the tradition will carry on. In this role, it means that King Charles will be responsible for appointing archbishops and bishops to their role. The king will of course be advised in this role by the Prime Minister, and it is said that the king is religious in his own right and that he has already spoken about how his personal faith has informed his approach to leadership.
Number 10. King Edward VIII. Directly after his father died in 1936, King Edward VIII took the throne, right? That's pretty normal. But the tides quickly turned when, less than a year later, he renounced his position. Now, this was of course a huge scandal right off the bat. This is not something that's taken lightly in the royal family. Turns out the woman responsible for stealing his heart was that of Wallis Simpson, American socialite who had already been divorced once before and was at this point working through her second divorce. So you can only imagine how everybody reacted at that point, right? Oh, how dare she? His proposal to Simpson, of course, caused social and political backlash. The Church of England wasn't so chill with Edward marrying someone who had already been divorced. Yeah, they're not really okay with that. So Edward was forced to abdicate. Yeah, he had to, right, for love. Edward and Simpson then tied the knot in 1937, and they stayed together until Edward's death much later in 1972. Sliding into royal DMs right off the hop. Okay, we're in for a treat. Number 9, dark predictions. Of course, in recent years, the royal family has seen a change that many didn't really expect. When Harry and Meghan chose to renounce their royalty status, speculation began that this could be the beginning of the end for the monarchy. People only fueled their fire with questions, and also, somebody may have called it. Yeah, Nostradamus, he may have predicted this entire event. One of his predictions literally reads, "At the end of the war, the great powers change. Near the coast are born 3 beautiful children. They will ruin the town when they come of age, they will change the kingdom, and they will not see it grow anymore." Now, Harry is only one of 2 children, so I'm not sure if the, quote was talking about him and his siblings, or if it has more to do so with some other royal family members, but either way, there's some people who take Nostradamus' words very, very seriously out there, so I had to include it. Maybe there's something there, I don't know, maybe there's something we haven't quite breaking down yet. That's why we need National Treasure 3, maybe this is the plot. Number 8, King Henry II. While we're on the topic of him, could Nostradamus have actually predicted the death of King Henry II? Because if he did, that's pretty curious, I'd say. Never used the word curious in my life, but I'm like, you know what, that's curious. King Henry II was actually a personal acquaintance of the prophet himself. That'd be kind of cool, being friends with Nostradamus. I'd be like, hey, how does Game of Thrones end? Please. While at one point in history, Nostradamus was seen addressing King Henry II as the most invincible King Henry of France, unfortunately, Henry proved to be quite vincible when he met his gruesome death, might I add, at age 40. Yeah, in the summer of 1559, not a great time. A terrible jousting accident went wrong and it left the king passing away shortly after from sepsis. This is a terrible story, but I have to explain because, it's history and well, that's what we're here for. The jousting accident saw the king having splinters driven into his eye, and then his skull as well, by one of his young soldiers. And the Nostradamus quote reads, "The young lion will overcome the older one. It says he will pierce his eyes through a golden cage." Okay, already we're a little bit spooky. "And that 2 wounds will ensure a cruel death." So, I'm not saying he predicted it, I'm just saying, kind of nailed it.
In our number 7 spot today, we have King Charles I. Okay, this is one that goes way back and it really creeps me out. So King Charles I, right now we're on the 3rd, so we're taking it a couple back. King Charles I was tried for treason after the Civil War, and he ended up being beheaded in 1649. I guess in the 1600s everyone was beheaded, so this wasn't necessarily abnormal, which is certainly weird, but that's a history lesson for another day. The weird part of this, however, is that apparently his head was sewn back on his body so that he could sit for a portrait, or it was perhaps supposed to be a sign of respect. Either way, it's very weird and very gross. I feel terrible for whoever's job it was to do that, and I also feel bad for the artist who was forced to paint that. Talk about traumatic. It does certainly make sense though that people say that Charles' ghost still haunts a building because there is no amount of haunting that could make up for being beheaded and then having your head sewn back onto your body. Okay, why'd we do the first part if we were gonna do the second? Could've just cut the middleman, But instead, they cut his head off, okay?
Number 6, the Great Irish Famine. The Great Irish Famine took out many, many people. Back in 1845, potato crop that a lot of the Irish population relied on were suddenly no longer available. See, a group of microorganisms wiped them out, and in result, around 1 million folks died or had to leave. Now, it was draconian law and British ruling at this point that made the exported food hard to reach people. That's where things stopped. This famine led to Irish independence, of course, and anti-union movements, and the show Victoria pulled back 0 punches in 2017, where an episode showed the true happenings behind the Great Irish Famine and the role that Queen Victoria played in coming to the aid of her then subjects. It was the death of at least 1 million people. This was a very dark 7 years in Irish history. Historian Christine Keneally spoke out and says, quote, "There is no evidence that she had any real compassion for the Irish people in any way." Yikes. That's a historian saying that. That's how you know.
At number 5, sucking toes. The British royal family are considered celebrities. I mean, with the amount of time people spend obsessing about their every move, I'd say that they're 10 times more famous than the Kardashians. They don't need their own reality show for people to keep up with them. People just do it. With this obsession with the royals obviously comes paparazzi trying to get the latest scoop on members of the family and what they do in their spare time, as well as who they're canoodling with. This was how Sarah Ferguson was exposed for seeing other men shortly after she and Prince Andrew separated. Sarah was photographed topless on a beach with a man named John Bryan, and it could have just been a juicy story by itself, but things got weird when pictures were published showing the man sucking on Sarah's toes. This again wasn't a good look for the royals, and the queen was pretty mad about the whole situation, but I'd like to look at the bright side of this. Think that this John Bryan guy had a pretty good time throughout all this. I mean, he got to suck royal toes and be published in the newspaper. Sounds like a pretty lit time for him.
Number 4, Prince Charles and Princess Diana's divorce. Prince Charles, the oldest son of the Queen, straight up admitted to having an affair with Camilla Parker before his divorce from his first wife, of course, Princess Diana. Imagine having this is crazy. A princess? You cheated on a princess? That's insane. So in turn, Princess Diana addressed the relationship and what's happening during, that famous 1995 interview with BBC. She couldn't have said it better, if I'm being honest. Diana said herself, quote, "Well, there's 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." Yeah, end quote. There's no better way of putting it, I think. It's a pretty baller way of saying it. I don't know. I haven't said baller in like 13 years, but I'm like, you know what? That's a baller move. It's pretty gangster. Diana also said she was in love with riding instructor Major James Hewitt during her marriage to Charles, so everybody was busy looking other directions, it seems. Diana and Charles divorced in 1996, only 1 year before her tragic car accident. Now later in 2005, Charles ended up marrying Camilla. Has anyone seen Spencer? Kristen Stewart looked great in that movie, and now I want to watch it. Is it worth the watch? Let me know in the comments. I didn't see it go to theaters or anything. It kind of snuck by me. I was sleeping on all the good ones.
In our number 3 spot today, we have Richard III. There are many questions surrounding this king's rise to power because, well, it seems sketchy at best. When King Edward IV died in 1483, he left behind 2 sons. The eldest of the 2, Edward V, was too young to rule on his own, so the sons were to be looked after and to be advised by Richard III, the late king's brother. Well, something strange happened after just 68 days when the sons were sent to the Tower of London and then were never heard from again. Of course, this meant that Richard III needed to take over the throne. To this day, no one knows exactly what happened to the sons, as they have never been found. Was this just a tragic coincidence, or is Richard III a usurper? Richard met his fate in battle just 2 years later and took these secrets with him to the grave.
Number 2, Vegas getaway. Nice, roll those dice. It's one thing to party like a rock star, but to party like a prince? What does that even mean? I gotta keep this Prince Harry train going because, well, now I'm mad at him, but there's even more photos from history that show what was really going down in the royal family, His priorities, dare I say. After that party incident, just 7 years later, scandalous photos emerged from Harry's Las Vegas trip. Yeah, I had a little boys' night, it seems. It turns out what happens in Vegas may just leak online for your entire family to see, and your grandmother. That's probably not a great time. These scandalous pics were taken during a strip pool game. Lovely, we like that. Make sure you call the right pocket while you're not wearing any. The scandal actually prompted St. James Palace to contact the Press Complaints Commission before the snaps even made their way to British tabloids. Yeah, they knew right off the bat they were fucked. They're like, can we call them? Can we send a pigeon? What's the fastest? And finally, number 1, Boy Jones and other attempts. Okay, being the queen and all in history, a security team is always needed, obviously. And during her reign, specifically Queen Victoria, there were multiple attempts to harm the young queen. First attack was in 1840. It was an 18-year-old man named Edward Oxford, and he fired towards the Queen's carriage. When Edward was accused of high treason, of course, afterwards, he was actually found not guilty due to, you guessed it, insanity. A couple years later, in 1842, it happened again. This time, 2 men fired at her, both also missed. In 1849, her carriage was attacked by William Hamilton. In 1850, as the carriage was passing the gates of Buckingham Palace, Robert Pate, a retired soldier, might I add, ran up and hit her with his cane. Victoria was okay, luckily, but of course she was shook. Then these incidents kept occurring again in 1842, 1849, and 1872. Attempt after attempt after attempt. But then things got a little worse and, dare I say, a little bit more weird. If you haven't heard of Boy Jones or anything that happened there, I saved it for last because it's so horribly creepy. A teenager stalked the Queen back in 1838 until 1841, and his name was Edward Jones. Edward Boy Jones. This guy somehow managed to break into Buckingham Palace more than once, right? Before Assassin's Creed came out, no idea how we thought of this. Guy just knows a route in, and he would break in and would hide under the Queen's sofa. That was his go-to spot. Or he would sometimes just sit on her throne. And one of the worst things ever, sometimes he would go through her drawers. He would go through the Queen's drawers. That's so gross. What? Like that's gross. He would steal her clothes until eventually, and thankfully, he got caught. Kicking off our list at number 10, Princess Diana. We'll start with a tragedy right off the gate. Here we go. Prince Charles, the oldest son of the Queen, he straight up admitted to having an affair with Camilla right before his divorce from his first wife, Princess Diana. So, in turn, Princess Diana addressed that relationship and what exactly happened. During that famous 1995 interview with BBC, she couldn't have said it better if I'm being honest myself. Diana said, very confidently, "Well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." That's a Princess Diana roast, folks. Oh no! Yeah, Princess Diana, she's full of roasts apparently. Diana also said she was in love with riding instructor Major James Hewitt during her marriage to Charles, so everybody was a little busy, it seemed, and rightfully so. Diana's like, yeah, I'm not hanging out with this guy. Diana and Charles divorced in 1996, only a year before her tragic accident took her life. Later in 2005, he married Camilla. Yeah, has anybody seen Spencer? Kristen Stewart looks great in that movie, and I want to know if it's worth the watch. Comment down below. Number 9, The Great Fire. One of the most wild Nostradamus predictions of all time. It reads, "The blood of the just will commit a fault at London, burnt through lightning of 23's the 6th. The ancient lady will fall from her high place, several of the same sect will be killed." Now, there are of course many people who believe that this entry here was actually one that predicted the Great Fire of London that occurred in 1666. The line 23's the 6th and times 20 by 3, and then you add 6, you get 66. Right? Quick math. But most importantly, it may also mention London and the royal family. And in real life, this fire did affect them as well. Also, it is said by many that the reference to the lady here is another term for the kingdom, the lady. This means that Nostradamus was predicting, maybe, that the kingdom was going to fall as a result of the Great Fire. So, yeah, he kind of nailed it. I don't know. Number 8, King James. Not to be confused with LeBron James, although he's a pretty good king as well. He's alright, that fellow. This is a different king. In an official 16th century medical book, the actual medical advice at one point was to not bathe. Don't do it or else you're a sinner, I guess. Use not baths or stews, nor sweat too much, for all openeth of the pores of a man's body, and maketh the venomous air to enter, and for to infect the blood. First of all, what? What did you just say? Why is every shred of medical knowledge from the past always written in riddles, like it's a Harry Potter spell? You know what I mean? God forbid you have bronchitis in the 16th century. A doctor is like, yes, just a flower petal will fix that. A doctor with one of these comes in? No way, not listening to that guy. They thought that taking a bath would make you sick, so King James IV, apparently he never took a bath. And his hygiene was so bad that he would sometimes pass on lice to others just by walking by them. He would walk by and they'd be like, "Ugh. Guy's got Steven Tyler's hair. What is that? Like, can we cut it if it's infected with gross? Can we just, maybe a bald king? How does a bald king sound?"
Time to take life insurance policies out. We're meeting the Castro Angel Landing family. Cult. You know there had to be at least one coming up. They love to call themselves families after all. Angel's Landing is the name of a 20-acre compound outside of Wichita, Kansas, where Lou Castro and a small group of people lived an inexplicably extravagant life in the early 2000s. His followers were convinced he was an angel seer who saw the future and knew how people were gonna die. Turns out the reason he knew was because he was gonna be the the one making it happen. Patricia Hughes showed up dead in 2003 and police turned their attention to the secluded luxury compound. There were high-end vehicles and appliances, well-kept lavish homes, pools, and just a lot of wealth that wasn't accounted for or could be explained. Then Patricia's husband dies in 2006 on compound once again by a freak accident, and Ron Goodwin dived into every bit of personal and financial information he could find on the people living at Angel's Landing. Turns out our buddy Castro took out expensive life insurance policies on certain cult members and had them cashed in by other members when someone in the makeshift family accidentally died. This pattern occurred around every 2 years and for about a decade, unnoticed. Turns out his name wasn't even Lou Castro, but Daniel Perez, a man from Texas with many police reports. Perez was charged with 28 felonies, and in February 2015 he was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 80 years in prison. The cult was later profiled on an episode of Oxygen's Deadly Cults.
Number 6. Prince Harry costume party. YouTube doesn't like when I say some words, specifically a word that rhymes with Yahtzee. But with this being one of the biggest scandals, I have to bring it up, I have to mention it. The Duke was also referred to as a bad boy, but just how deep did these incidents cut? Was he like topless on a beach and he's bad, or was he dressed up as something horrible at a Halloween party? It was the latter. Before he settled down with Meghan in 2018, Harry had to issue a public apology in 2005 because, whoops, somebody got photos from that party. Did the royal dress up as the Beast from Beauty and the Beast? No. Did he dress up like a witch? No, it would have been fun, but no. Photos leaked of him wearing a World War II German soldier outfit. Can't say much here, but it was even equipped with a specific armband. Yeah, we can't show you either, but you get what I'm saying. This was a not great time. It was poor taste. He could have dressed up in any way. He's a royal, and he does this instead. I don't know, it's very off-putting. Harry said afterwards, quote, "I am very sorry if I caused any offense or embarrassment to anyone," end quote. Wow, he really meant that one. Really came from the heart, that apology. It was a poor choice of costume, and I apologize, he says. Okay.
In our number 6 spot today, we have the Rockefeller family. The Rockefeller family is a very prominent American family that has played a very significant role in business, politics, philanthropy, and society for over a century. The family's wealth really started out with John D. Rockefeller, who founded the Standard Oil Company in the late 19th century and became one of the richest men in history. John actually had a major impact on the American economy, transforming the oil industry and creating a very vast empire that completely dominated the market. His business practices, including aggressive competition and horizontal integration, drew both admiration as well as criticism. The Rockefellers also had a hand in helping the construction of the United Nations, and they also founded Bilderberg, which is where the most powerful people in the world meet up. Other notable members of the Rockefeller family include Nelson Rockefeller, who served as governor of New York and vice president of the United States, and David Rockefeller, who was a very prominent banker and philanthropist. The family continues to be involved in various industries and philanthropic activities, with some estimates suggesting that their combined wealth is in the billions of dollars. Some out there also believe that the Rockefeller family now controls things, but in secret, through oil companies like ExxonMobil and BP, as well as through banks like Chase Manhattan Bank.
Number 4. Prince Charles the Vampire. Now, some of these theories, yeah, they're a bit out there. I didn't make them up. I wish I did, but I didn't. Some believers out there actually think Prince Charles is a vampire, a blood-sucking, flying, turning into a bat-looking vampire. I don't know. Why? Because Prince Charles is related to Vlad the Impaler. You know, that 15th century ruler who inspired the story of Dracula in Transylvania, who we're all pretty sure was a vampire. Now, it's a fun theory that went about, but Prince Charles having a piece of Romania is definitely helping out this case. We kind of believe this. The prince has been conserving forests, and he even got property over there, so maybe he's a vampire, maybe not. Maybe he just likes property and castles. And Vlad the Impaler. I heard he's a great lad. A great Vlad.
In our number 3 spot today, we have the Duggars. Alright, one of the most famous reality TV families, and even before the horrors of this family came to light, they were already a family that had fame due to quite a strange reason. If you're unfamiliar with who the Duggars are, you might be more familiar with the show that they used to have on TLC titled 19 Kids and Counting. Yeah, the show ran on TLC for 7 years until it was cancelled in 2015, and the show featured, well, the Duggar family. The family consisted of parents Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar and their 19 children, 9 daughters and 10 sons, all of whose names begin with the letter J. It was an interesting time, and they seemed like this huge, happy, religious family, but in the years since the cancellation of the show, some horrifying things came to light. Initially, the reason that TLC suspended and then subsequently cancelled the show is because it came to light that the eldest son in the family, Josh, had done some horrible things and acted violently, horrendously, and inexcusably against a number of girls, even some in his own family. Due to the popularity of the show before these serious stories came to light, there was a spin-off show that was created titled Counting On. This show first aired in December 2015 and stayed on the air for a surprising number of years before it was pulled, and the family yet again found themselves in the center of a scandal that had to do with Josh. This time he was caught in possession of a certain kind of tape that no one should have, and that should not even exist at all. I can't say which kind of tape, but just know it's the worst of the worst. These are, of course, some of the worst scandals that have surrounded the family, but truly, it's only a drop in the bucket of the many stories surrounding them.
Number 2. Leaked letters. We'll end with some recent leaked letters. We love those. We love some gossip. We mentioned Princess Diana. Well, we've got more stuff. We've got more tea. In May 2018, the royal wedding, it was thought at the time that Meghan's father was absent because of a heart attack that he suffered days before. But a year or so later, it's revealed that Thomas Markle and the new Duchess weren't as close. There was some drama. There was some beef going on in the family. Thomas spoke out against his own daughter. There was a scandal where Meghan spoke to Oprah, the tell-all that we all watched, and Meghan actually said to her father that if you tell me the truth about what happened, about working with paparazzi, then we can help and get through it. But he wasn't able to do that, and that for me has really resonated. Yeah, if my dad was working with paparazzi, showing them private letters as well, just for clout, I'd be upset too. As if my dad can't even open his iPad without me, let alone leak my letters. Number 1, personal sheet changer. I can't tell if this is the worst thing ever or the best, but it's kept me laughing for months now. Royals have been sweating constantly about other people trying to, take them out, right? It's a scary job. Everyone wants to attack you. I mentioned Boyd Jones on here a few times, that guy that stalked the Queen. It's terrifying. People are terrifying. Boyd Jones would go through the Queen's drawers and, big ooh. So historically, the royal family would try their best to anticipate any and all attacks. Be as safe as you can be, right? Of course. Like the kissing sheets, for example. Oh, have you heard about these kissing sheets, this royal position? A great deal of monarchs hired taste testers to make sure nobody poisoned them, that's normal. But they also had a guy who would get tucked in the king's sheets. I would much rather have the latter, know what I mean? King Henry VIII hired somebody to make sure the bed wasn't poisoned. So you were required to make the king's bed every morning, but you also had to rub all the sheets down everywhere before bedtime. You'd have to kiss the bed sheets to make sure they weren't poisoned. Yeah, sleep tight. I'll sleep here, boss. Here we go. Don't mind the old medieval dad breath all over your pillows. You're safe for the night. That's so gross. I can't even sleep in a hotel sometimes, let alone some dude. Mwah, 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 mwah. Mwah, mwah. I'm like, what are you doing? Get this guy out of here. Why is he kissing my bed? Clothes as well. That was also touched. Maybe not kissed, but it was for sure touched. Guys wearing my clothes in my bed, kissing my sheets? No way. I think I'd rather get poisoned. Take my jeans off. Get out of there.
So to start, it's Genghis Khan. That's probably the most obvious start in this case. Good old Genghis was the ruler and emperor of the Mongol Empire, the largest empire in history. How'd he do that? Well, even if they were outnumbered, which they usually were, the Mongols were masters of tactical and psychological warfare. They always had one-time offer for any city or civilization they came across. If this people in the town surrendered, the Mongols would treat them well and allow them the fruits of a secure world. They had considerable personal liberty, religious freedoms, and overall more rights. Once the Mongols were empowered, their land was safe and well controlled. If, however, the people resisted the Mongol advance, they and their cities would feel the full fury of the enraged invaders. The Mongols were violent, decapitating a path from the west shores of the Black Sea to the Pacific. Some experts calculate that fully 11% of the world's population died because of the Mongol expansion. He died in 1227 himself after defeating the Tanguts, and he left his successor and sons to handle everything everything. Don't think they're any better, however. His grandson told the Pope that he'd only protect Christian pilgrimage to Jerusalem if the Pope brought every king of Christendom to Khan to swear fealty. And his son committed one of the worst Mongol atrocities recorded against the Oryats. So I could go on, but we got more freaks to talk about. Your takeaway is don't mess with a Mongol. Ed Hardy fans, you'll know this one, the Krays. Dramatized in the 2015 movie Legends, these identical twins are unique in comparison to other criminal empire leaders. They ruled East End London with an iron fist during the swingin' 60s. Their criminal empire depended on robbery and protection rackets to thrive. The Krays and their associates would ensure compliance by readily resorting to arson, assault, and killings. The fear they inspired stopped even the most cowardly of snitches from saying a peep. They operated out of a nightclub and they were familiar figures on the street, but the streets are different during the day and, surprising to many, ordinary people who were untouched by the Krays' business interests actually revered them. They acted as a sort of local authority, helping people with their problems, debts, hurtful spouses, or failing homes. They guaranteed safety on the street and delivered it. It wasn't even just the ordinary people that admired the Kray brothers, but celebrities and politicians too. The police arrested them in 1968 after Ronnie's mental decline, caused by his refusal to take medication, led to the operation to make some sloppy mistakes. AKA, he literally killed 2 people at separate public events. 2 occasions, guys. Ronnie was sent to a high-security psychiatric facility due to his instability, but also his homosexuality. Unfortunately, that's how the times were. He died in 1995 while his brother died in 2000, 5 weeks after authorities released him from prison on a compassion ground for his terminal cancer. This Spanish family has lurid tales, but are they fact or are they fiction? The Borgias. Originally from Spain, the family became important in 15th century political and religious world. Caesar, the Borgias patriarch's father, was elected pope in 1492 of the titular church of Santa Maria Nova, making Caesar the archbishop and later the cardinal in 1492. Caesar, however, had no interest in religious vocation. He was better known at the papal court for his hunting parties and amorous liaisons and flashy clothes, rather than meticulous religious observations. On the death of Pedro Luis in 1488, the title of Duke of Granda had been handed past him and gone to his younger brother Juan. When Juan was mysteriously murdered in 1497, the rumor gradually spread that Caesar was the culprit. Ambitious and hungry for yet more power, the family included 2 popes, one of which was Alexander, the father of the famous Lucrezia. Her family was perfectly happy to use her as a pawn in their power plays. She entered into several arranged marriages, each one helped the Borgias extend their grip. She's also what inspired the belief that they really kept it in the family. After retiring to Naples after being a professional wife, Giovanni, dubbed the Roman infant, is seen at approximately age 3 for the first time. 2 papal bulls recognized the child as an illegitimate son of first Caesar, her uncle, and then of Alexander, her dad, who probably was the true father. The mysterious origin of the child, as well as her presence at a celebrated night group romp in the Vatican, has been used to support the rumors. You can learn more about this disastrous family in a 3-season TV drama literally named after them, the Borgias.
Number 7. King Rudolph II. The Holy Roman Emperor from 1552. He was known as a collector of sorts. These royals, they like to collect things, they like to spend their money on weird things. Some princes collect stamps, others collect zoo animals. See, his castle was home to lions, tigers, and orangutans, so good luck getting a full 8 hours of sleep, my friends. He also collected human artifacts, this royal, so that's a bit odd to collect when you're a royal. Imagine having company over, you're like, yeah, watch the lion crap, and also don't mind the jars of eyes. Do you want a drink? Let me get you a drink. King Rudolph II, okay, he's quite important in history, obviously. He supported the scientific revolution a lot, and he also poured tons of money into astrology, so he was into cool stuff.
Next up is Lucky Luciano. We love a fun and flirty nickname, one he earned for success at evading arrest and winning craps games. Lucky was the most powerful chief of American organized crime in the early 1930s and a major influence even from prison and after deportation to Italy. At 10, he was already involved in muggings, shoplifting, extortion. After a 6-month jail sentence when he was a teen, Lucky teamed up with Frank Costello and Mayor Lansky and other young gangs, and later New York's rising crime boss Joe Masseria, who he becomes second-hand man to. In October of 1929, he becomes the rare survivor of a one-way ride when he's abducted by 4 men in a car, beaten, stabbed, had his throat slit from ear to ear, and was left for dead. but he survived and never named his abductors metal. Lucky had carefully nurtured his contacts with the young powers and had become the boss of all bosses without ever accepting or claiming the title. By 1934, he and the leaders of other crime families had developed the National Crime Syndicate. In 1936, Lucky was indicted, tried, and convicted for his brothels and call girl empire, and was sentenced to Clinton prison for a 30 to 50 year term. From his cell, he continued to rule and issue orders, and in 1942, the luxury liner Normandy was destroyed in the New York harbor, and Navy intelligence sought Luciano's help in tightening waterfront security. Lucky gave the orders, and sabotage on the docks ended, and in 1946 his sentence was commuted and he was deported to Italy, where he settled in Rome. He then bounced from Cuba to Naples and continued his crime empire until he died of a heart attack in an airport in Naples, Florida in 1962.
In our number 5 spot today we have Prince John. It is said that this may be one of the darkest secrets of the British royal family. Prince John would have been the uncle of Queen Elizabeth II, but he passed before she was born. Prince John was the 6th child of King George V and Queen Mary, and it is said that he suffered from seizures, likely as a result of epilepsy, although it's hard to diagnose for certain because of all of the secrecies surrounding him and his illness. From the age of 4, when he had his first seizure, until his untimely and very early death, Prince John lived in a separate estate where he was cared for by a governess. Many people have since criticized the royal family, calling their treatment of Prince John as callous or inhumane, like they were hiding him away for being ill. Of course, the palace was concerned with the monarchy's public image, and there was a belief at the time that royals shouldn't have any physical or mental ailments, although that is of course impossible. They also didn't include him in public events, which could have been another image thing, and also perhaps because of a worry that he might have a seizure at one of these events. At the end of the day, it was definitely a different time, but the idea of excluding him because he was ill truly is a really sad thought.
One of the few mafiastos to be executed is Louis Lepke Buccialter. Nicknamed Lepkele, Little Louis in Yiddish, then shortened to Lepke, this crime boss was a quiet man for years, managed to avoid public spotlight. In conversations with criminal associates, Lepke preferred listening over talking. He was an overall nice man, appreciated by the community for how he aided his neighbors. He generously compensated his crew members and took them to hockey games, boxing matches, and even winter cruises. He married a widower named Betty and adopted Betty's child from the previous marriage. In the early 1930s, Lepke created an effective process of performing contract killings for the Cosa Nostra mobsters. It had no name, but the press 10 years later called it Murder Inc. The Cosa Nostra mobsters wanted to insulate themselves from any connection to these killings. So Lepke's partner would relay the contract request from the Costra to Lepke, who would assign it to a street member who had no connections with any major crime family. If they were caught, they could not implicate the Costra members in the crime. They were soon completing jobs all over the country for their mobster bosses, grossing over $1 million in profit per year. Ultimately, Lepke is cornered and forced to surrender after 3 years of hiding when the killing of Joseph Rosen, an informant, goes awry. He's tried for the killing of Rosen alongside 3 other murders, and Lepke is found guilty and sentenced to death. He exhausts his 4 appeals, but is executed by electric chair in 1944.
In our number 3 spot today, we have the Bush family. The Bush family is a very prominent American political family that has produced 2 US presidents, several other notable politicians, and successful business people. The story of the Bush dynasty really starts off with Prescott Sheldon Bush, who was a successful businessman and US senator from Connecticut. Allegedly, he became a member of a group called Skull and Bones and apparently was behind the failed military coup in 1933, which was aimed at taking power away from Franklin Roosevelt. During the Second World War, he was also the head of the Union Banking Corporation. This is all fine and well until the bank was impounded due to their connections with, well, you know who, the evil head of the Second World War. The Bush legacy continued on with his son, George H.W. Bush, who served as vice president under Ronald Reagan and was later elected president in 1988. George H.W. Bush's son, George W. Bush, served as governor of Texas and was also elected president, serving from 2001 to 2009. For people around my age, this is probably the most well-known member of the Bush family, and that is due to the multiple scandals surrounding his presidency, which would include the Iraq War as well as the response to Hurricane Katrina. Other notable members of the Bush family include Jeb Bush, another son of George H.W., who served as governor of Florida and ran unsuccessfully for president in 2016, as well as Neil Bush, who is also a businessman. Overall, the Bush family has had a significant impact on American politics and public life, and their legacy continues to be felt today.
It sounds so much more innocent than it is. The Bean Clan. Picturesque Scotland, a land of of mystery and rolling dewy fields, glens, and hills that 100% have eyes. That's right, we're talking about the freaks who inspired the nauseating horror movie that we're never gonna forget anytime soon. Back in the 16th century, Alexander Bean and his partner, Black Agnes Douglas, set up home in a hidden sea cave and started popping out babies. Why? I don't know. Why a cave? Again, I don't know. Maybe they just wanted the saltiest and driest sinuses and intercourse ever. Well, the weirdos never left that cave, and they never let any of the kids leave it either. By keeping it in the family, the clan eventually grew to about 45 members, all starting from just the 2. Jobs were hard to come by when you're not part of society and potentially terrifying looking from inbreeding, so why not just murk and eat travelers whenever you're feeling peckish or want a new shirt? That's exactly what they did, operating only at night and retiring to their cave by day where they could enjoy a roasted meal of unfortunate victims and rest like weird hick vampires. Locals had no idea what was going on because they weren't being picked away at like croutons from the veggie tray, and the Bean clan survived doing this for 25 years, munching down on what's estimated to be about 1,000 people. Naturally, it eventually gets found out by the locals and they decide to do an old-fashioned mob style on this one. They descend on the cave and cut the off the men, followed by their hands and feet, leaving them to bleed to death. Everyone else was burnt alive. I'm sure if they could have, these weirdos would have attended their own massacre just to snack on their own cooking remains. And now the most dysfunctional family in history, the Ptolemies. The last dynasty of Greek Egypt. Their first 3 monarchs of the dynasty were capable, vigorous sorts that did things like build the great library at Alexandria on their weekends off. But from the 4th century forward, it was nightmarish. It's like they were on a game show where you tried to kill as many of your close relatives as you were able, preferably in as painful and public of a way as possible. This is complicated for 2 reasons. 1, they kept the names in the family. Men were always named Ptolemy, and women 9 times out of 10 were called Cleopatra. 2, they kept their seed in the family too, following the Egyptian tradition, brother and sister wed and had children. This means it's not easy to explain who is killing whom. What follows offered is a kind of prose poem compiled of examples dedicated to the most bestial family in history. Alright, so Ptolemy 5 was the nicest of the later Ptolemies and thoughtfully had his mother's killers ripped apart by a mob. Ptolemy 6 fought his own brother for the throne and then married his sister Cleopatra 2. Ptolemy 4 kills his mom, who had killed her husband for having a love affair with her mother. Ptolemy 8 was a great enemy of Ptolemy 6 and the probable killer of Ptolemy 7. He also married Cleopatra 2 and then began an affair with Cleopatra's daughter, Cleopatra 3. So Ptolemy 8 had Ptolemy 6 dismembered and the pieces sent to the mother, Cleopatra 2. I could keep going, like for hours. They burned, cooked, eviscerated, literally anything you can think of, they did to one another. All of this comes down to the bottom of the family tree, Cleopatra 7, the daughter of Ptolemy 12, the famous Caesar-loving, Mark Antony-loving Cleopatra who blew Egypt out of the water.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the Morgan family. The Morgan dynasty refers to a wealthy and influential American family that made its fortune in the banking industry. The family's patriarch, Junius Spencer Morgan, was born in 1813 and began his career as a banker in Boston. He later moved to London where he worked for the banking firm George Peabody & Co. and established his own firm, J.S. Morgan & Co. Junius Spencer Morgan's son, John Pierpont Morgan, also known as J.P. Morgan, became one of the most powerful financiers of all time. It is said that during the bank crisis in 1893, J.P. Morgan borrowed 100 tons of gold to the U.S. authorities, which is how he and his family would later go on to control the gold in the USA. He expanded the family's banking empire and played a major role in financing many of the largest industrial and infrastructure projects of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, including the creation of U.S. Steel, General Electric, and International Harvester. There are some pretty dark beliefs that some have about this family that ties to their involvement in both world wars, as well as the fact that members of the family played significant roles in the founding of the Federal Reserve System and the International Monetary Fund. The family's wealth and influence has allowed them to maintain close ties to the political and the social elite. Today, the Morgans still own the biggest family reserve of gold, and rumor has it that it is connected by a tunnel with the New York branch of the U.S. Central Bank. In our number 9 spot today, we have the DuPont family. The DuPont family is a prominent family of French descent that has played a very significant role in the development of the United States since the late 18th century. The family has been involved in a variety of industries, including chemicals, gunpowder, textiles, and agriculture. The DuPont family's story began with, the first DuPont, who was a French chemist who immigrated to the United States in 1800. He would later go on to found a chemical company that specialized in the production of gunpowder. The company's success helped to establish the DuPont family as one of the wealthiest and most powerful in the United States. These roots only grew deeper as the family allegedly ensured the US purchase of Louisiana from Napoleon in 1803. During World War II, the family's chemical company played a very significant role in the Manhattan Project, which developed the very first atomic bomb. The family has also been involved in politics, with several members serving as governors, senators, and other elected officials. Some even believe that this family had the ability to influence US authorities so much that they might be responsible for the initial ban of the production of hemp and the ban on the devil's lettuce in order to protect the production of nylon, which was one of the most important products for the DuPont company. Today, the company is one of the biggest producers of GMO seeds, and they also have founded the Doomsday Treasury, where samples of all plants are held and preserved in the case of an apocalypse. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Rothschild family. The Rothschild dynasty is a very wealthy and influential family that gained prominence in the late 18th and early 19th centuries through their banking and financial activities. The family originated in Frankfurt, Germany, and its founder, Mayer Amschel Rothschild, began his banking career in the 1760s. Apparently, he sent 5 of his sons to financial centers so that the family could be involved in all of the most important places for world finances. The Rothschilds quickly became one of the most powerful banking families in Europe, with branches in major cities such as Paris, Vienna, and London. They financed governments, monarchs, and other wealthy individuals and played a very significant role in the economic and political affairs of many European countries. One of the most notable achievements of the family was their role in financing the British war effort against Napoleon Bonaparte in the early 19th century. The family used their vast network of agents and couriers to get information about the outcome of battles before anyone else, which allowed them to make informed decisions about investments. The Rothschilds also played a key role in the development of the modern banking system, including the establishment of the Bank of England and the introduction of the concept of a central bank. Today, the family remains one of the wealthiest and most influential in the world, with a net worth estimated at several billions of dollars, with some estimating that they manage trillions of dollars worth of money. Some even claim that the Rothschild family controls the world through the US Central Bank Federal Reserve. In our number 7 spot today, we have Prince Sado. Born in 1735, Prince Sado was the heir to the Korean throne, but unfortunately, he would go on to suffer from extreme mental illness and delusions. Thankfully for historians and those of us interested in history, the wife of the prince created memoirs, and in them she detailed the horrifying things that happened next. The prince began to kill. He began to hurt and torment people. He basically turned their home into a house of horrors. The prince also endured some pretty horrific treatment from his own father, which of course is not an excuse for the things he did, but it definitely did not help the scenario. Eventually, the family had enough and realized that his behavior would go on to ruin the name of their family forever, so something needed to be done. At the time, tradition stated that if the prince were to be executed, his wife and child would also need to be, but everyone thought that maybe that was a bit too far. Why should they have to pay for his crimes? This led to the king coming up with quite the bizarre workaround for this. On a hot day in July, the king forced the prince to step into a rice chest, which was then locked behind him. This acted as a way to make it seem like he had caused his own death, which is said to have occurred just a few days later. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Walton family. The Walton family is one of the wealthiest families in the world and is best known for founding and owning the retail giant Walmart. This family is headed by siblings Jim, Alice, and Rob Walton, who inherited their fortune from their father, Sam Walton, who initially founded Walmart in 1962. Sam Walton began his career in retail with a single store in Arkansas, and over the years, he and his family grew Walmart into the largest retailer in the entire world, with thousands of stores in the United States and all around the world. Today, Walmart is a Fortune 500 company and one of the largest employers in the world, with over 2 million employees. The Walton family's net worth is estimated to be around $230 billion, making them one of the wealthiest families in the world. In addition to their stake in Walmart, the family also has investments in other businesses and ventures, and throughout the years it's been, the company receives both praise for their practices, but more often than not are met with criticism for much of the questionable and shady dealings.
Number 5. King Henry II. This is a quote that people believe was Nostradamus predicting the death of King Henry II, who actually was a personal acquaintance of the prophet himself. That'd be scary. Hey, how do I tell you this? While at one point Nostradamus was seen addressing King Henry II as the most invincible Henry, King of France, unfortunately Henry proved to be quite vincible when he met his gruesome death at the age of 40. In the summer of 1559, a terrible jousting accident went awry and left the king passing away shortly after from sepsis. This is a terrible story, but I told you it because many think that Nostradamus predicted this. The jousting incident saw the king having splinters driven into his eye and his skull by one of his young soldiers, and the Nostradamus quote reads, "The young lion will overcome the older one." Yeah, he's jousting and then the eye, and then it happened. That sucks.
In our number 4 spot today, we have the House of Saud. The House of Saud is the ruling royal family of Saudi Arabia, and they have been in power since the country was founded in 1932. Over the years, the House of Saud has maintained its grip on power through a combination of political alliances, military force, and religious legitimacy. The family has also been able to leverage its vast oil wealth to consolidate its power both domestically and internationally. When the vast oil resources hidden in Saudi Arabia were found, it not only completely changed the economy of the nation, but it also catapulted the House of Saud into the world of richest families ever. The current king of Saudi Arabia is King Salman, who ascended to the throne in 2015 following the death of his half-brother King Abdullah. The current king's son, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, is widely regarded as the de facto ruler of the country. Of course, because of their mass amount of wealth and their current political position, it is no wonder this royal family remains on the list of powerful families in the world.
You never know your neighbors, especially if they were Inessa, Roman, and their daughters. Inessa, a kindergarten teacher, and Roman, a successful dentist. Together, Inessa's daughters from her first marriage, 25-year-old Victoria, and just shy of legal daughter Anastasia, are responsible for the violent deaths of at least 30 people across southern Russia. Inessa and her family were highly organized, using information from Roman's sister and brother-in-law who had police connections to organize their crimes around police activity. This is because Inessa liked to go after police officers, as one had left her for another woman in the past. And her current husband didn't feel like she was living in the past either? Okay, alright. Their victims weren't exclusively police officers, however. The family MO was breaking and entering the houses of sleeping families while they road tripped under the guise of going on monthly camping trips. One victim was a police officer named Ivan, who was killed when he attempted to stop members of the gang from fleeing the scene of the crime. Roman was eventually killed in a bloody standoff with police, and Inessa was arrested. A search of the family home uncovered a slew of weaponry, a complete arsenal. Inessa, Anastasia, and Victoria all confessed to their crimes, the 6-year reign ending. Vladimir Markin, the chief of Russia's equivalent to the FBI, said, "I'm sure that when they were together, one could hardly imagine that they could even plan a crime."
In our number 2 spot today, we have the Cook family. The legacy of the Cook family dynasty really all starts back with the founding of the Cook Company. The company was founded by Fred C. Cook in 1940 and was later taken over by his sons Charles and David, who transformed it into a major conglomerate. Today, Cook Industries generates billions of dollars in revenue and employs tens of thousands of people around the world. The Cook brothers were also known for their significant involvement in conservative politics and advocacy. They were major donors to a variety of causes and organizations that promoted limited government, free markets, and individual liberty. The brothers also founded and supported a number of think tanks and political organizations, including the Cato Institute, Americans for Prosperity, and the Charles Cook Foundation, of course. David Cook did pass away a few years ago in 2019, but Charles is still involved, and Cook Industries is said to bring in over $1 trillion in annual revenue, which makes it one of the largest private firms in America. Some speculate that this mass fortune is sometimes used to assist in having a hand in political influence. Finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the Soros family. This family is perhaps best known for its patriarch, George Soros, who is a billionaire investor. Born in Hungary in 1930 and surviving through the atrocities of the Second World War, George would later become a very successful investor, earning his fortune through his hedge fund, Soros Fund Management. It is said that George and his success could largely be attributed to a very famous moment in history. On September 16, 1992, George helped his fund bring in $1 billion in a single day, and he did this by short selling the British pound. This day would go on to become known as Black Wednesday and went on to solidify him being known as, quote, the man who broke the Bank of England. Today, Today, his family, which includes his children, is among the most powerful families in the world due to their active geopolitical actions. Their influence and interest extends beyond the financial sector, as they are also heavily active in politics as well. Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot we have the Murdochs. With the high profile of this ongoing case, coupled with the fact that Netflix just released a chilling documentary about the story of this family, it is likely that you may already have quite the idea of who the Murdoch family is. Taylor and I have been watching the documentary series. We're past the first few episodes, and man, is this story wild. A few years ago, if someone asked you who the Murdoch family was, you would have likely described them as one of the most powerful families in South Carolina, with a legal dynasty that has spanned for a century. Now, if I asked you that same question, the answer would be a family who had it all: money, power, status. But some of the members flew a little too close to the sun, tragedy ensued, and now people have lost their lives and the family has been destroyed. It started back in 2015 with the death of Stephen Smith. It carries on to 2018 when Gloria Satterfield, a long-serving employee for the family, was found passed away after a quote trip and fall accident. These events are both horrible and completely atrocious, but despite the rumors, mysteries, and alleged conspirators of these deaths, things really started to unravel for the family in February of 2019 with the death of Mallory Beach. The young woman met her untimely fate after a boating accident where, allegedly, 19-year-old Paul Murdoch was at the wheel, intoxicated. We could spend hours and hours talking about this family and all of these cases and the conspiracies, but we are short for time, which brings me right to the most recent tragedy: the 2021 killings of that same Murdoch who was driving the boat, as well as the killing of his mother, Margaret. Now, I do believe that people are innocent until proven guilty, but it is important to note that the one on trial for these killings right now is the father and husband to the deceased, Alex Murdoch, the patriarch of the family who is supposed to be carrying on that Murdoch legacy. The stories surrounding this family are horrific, tragic, and a reminder of the dangers that money and power can bring. In our number 9 spot today we have the Sacklers. This family is the one behind the dynasty of Purdue Pharma, who is best known for producing an exceptionally strong prescription painkiller. Of course, we all know just how big and rich a pharmaceutical company could get, especially one that has been around for quite some time. The company was first created in 1952 by 3 Brooklyn-born brothers, and in the beginning, the company mostly dealt in things like laxatives and earwax removal methods. Soon, things for the company took quite an upwards turn, and before anyone knew it, the family was regarded as one of the most esteemed New York families, but they were also known for their philanthropic tendencies, with their names on museums and hospitals, some of the most famous in the world. You see, the thing is, when they released this painkiller in 1995, it led to them amassing an insane $13 billion fortune. That is obviously incredible, but the trouble came when it was realized that this painkiller wasn't nearly as potent as it was marketed to be, and frequent users would be building up a tolerance to it, meaning they needed to use higher and higher dosages. Viewer, welcome to the opioid crisis. Basically, this all spiraled out of control and led to many lawsuits coming against Purdue Pharma, not only by individuals, but by January 2019, 36 states were suing the company for what the painkiller had done to their citizens. After 2 years of deliberations, the Sacklers finally reached a deal with plaintiffs in bankruptcy court in September of 2021. As part of their Chapter 11 proposal, they agreed to pay $4.5 billion and give up all ownership of the company in exchange for complete immunity and all future opioid liability. Despite this fall from grace, the Sacklers were able to move an alleged $1.36 billion into offshore accounts, so despite their bankruptcy filing and the large sum of money handed over, they will continue to retain quite a large amount of their personal wealth. In our number 8 spot today we have the Bakers. Jim and Tammy Faye Baker were once the most famous televangelists in America, and they certainly were living in quite a lap of luxury. They had beautiful homes, expensive cars, and a ton of money, but that quickly came crashing down amid horrendous scandal. In the late 1980s, after much success, Jim Baker resigned from the PTL ministry after there was a cover-up to hide some hush money that had been given to church secretary Jessica Hahn over an alleged SA situation. Of course, not necessarily a surprise, but definitely not a good look for a televangelist. This led to more interest in people looking into the family more, and soon it was uncovered that there was some sort of accounting fraud going on as well. The consequences for this came by way of felony charges, conviction, then imprisonment and divorce. That was the end of that legacy, but since serving his time, Jim Bakker hasn't exactly slowed down. He not only remarried and returned to televangelism, but he also currently hosts The Jim Bakker Show, which focuses on the end times and the second coming of Christ while promoting emergency survival products. So that's interesting. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Windsor family. The Windsor family is of course the current reigning royal family of the United Kingdom. The dynasty was established in 1970 when King George V changed the family name from Saxe-Coburg and Gotha to Windsor. The House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, which itself was a branch of the House of Wettin, was a prominent German dynasty. Queen Victoria married her first cousin, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, and their descendants went on to become the rulers of several European countries. Many of us are of course privy to the many royal scandals there have been over the years for the Windsors, whether that has to do with the current king and his late wife, the very unsettling Prince Andrew, or some of the ongoing situations with Harry and Meghan. The former monarch, Her Royal Highness Queen Elizabeth II, ascended the throne in 1952 following the death of her father, King George VI. She was the longest reigning monarch in British history and oversaw very significant changes to the role and responsibilities of the British monarchy during her reign. Of course, as a monarch, this family retains quite a bit of power, a whole pile of wealth, and they are still heavily influential. In our number 6 spot today, we have Don Carlos. This little troublemaker never made it to the title of king, but he sure was a little too close for comfort when you hear about the kinds of things he was doing. Carlos was the Prince of Asturias in the mid-1500s, as he was the eldest son of King Philip II of Spain. It is said that Carlos may have had some troubles right from birth, which many believe could be due to inbreeding that was common in the family at the time. Descriptions of his behaviors, though, are far worse than what anyone could have expected. It is said that Carlos did horrible things like hurting or taking the lives of animals for fun. Nowadays, we call that a huge warning sign for potential killers. Back then, it was like, I don't know. Was anybody even watching you, really? It is even said that at one point he purposefully blinded all of the horses in the royal stable. Soon, of course, his cruelties would extend to humans, with people claiming that one time he chose to harm a servant girl for no reason other than because he could. Major King Joffrey vibes in that one. And apparently one time he made a shoemaker eat a pair of shoes that he had made that the prince didn't like. He was just a little twerp. Carlos was set up by his family to marry the eldest daughter of King Henry II, but after a few hours with the man, she decided that there was absolutely no way in hell. Like, he was so bad that she would rather marry his dad. Which she did in 1560. In the end, Carlos was found to be plotting to take out his own father, which landed him in prison in solitary confinement, where he passed away 6 months later.
A family gang of 4 so ferocious they have a catchy nickname to prove it: the Benders. The Benders settled in isolated Labette County, Kansas in the early 1870s following the New Spiritualism movement. This is because Kate, in her early 20s, was renowned for performing seances that showed off her psychic abilities at the store inn that the family ran. But this wasn't as picturesque as it seems. Historians are very confident that the Benders, living as a husband, wife, young adult son, young adult daughter dynamic, actually weren't even related, and none of them were even named Bender. Well, it'd be no biggie if it wasn't for the fact so many people who happened to pass through Labette County never made it to their final destinations, including a well-known local doctor, William York. After a community meeting about York, attended by both of the male Benders, it resulted in a search party formation, and it was soon noted that the Bender homestead appeared recently abandoned and full of evidence. Near the table where the guests were served was a trap door, and the foul-smelling hole beneath the door was just full of blood and gross stuff. The ground in an orchard nearby the house has been carefully plowed, but one small section was noticeably indented. The ground was dug up and revealed the decomposed body of Mr. York. 8 more bodies are found, skulls crushed, throats cut. Guests at the inn were urged to sit at the place of honor, which was a curtain dividing the house's rooms. While dining, the guest of honor would be hit in the head with a hammer from behind the curtain, his throat cut, and then his body dropped in the trap door to the cellar, Sweeney Todd style. Their motive, robbery, or the thrill of it, nobody actually knows, because despite a reward and several substantial claims of their capture at the hands of various posses, the Benders appear to have gotten away with it, and their grim story continues to intrigue.
In our number 4 spot today, we have Marguerite and Blanche of Burgundy. This is a royal scandal that took place all the way back in 1314, and it starts off with the daughters-in-law of King Philip IV of France. I think that's the 4th. Here's hoping. These young women, Marguerite and Blanche of Burgundy, were accused of having quite a scandalous affair with 2 brothers, Philippe and Gautier. So this'll already is some hot tea, but apparently when Queen Isabella of England, who is the daughter of King Philip of France, so I guess like sisters-in-law with these ladies, when she heard these stories, apparently she's the one who totally outed their affairs. It was obviously a huge deal and both of the women admitted to their adultery. This led to them being pretty much erased from public knowledge. They had their hair cut short and they were thrown in a dungeon, and even though Marguerite was meant to be the Queen of France through her marriage, when her husband ascended the throne, she stayed locked in the dungeon until the marriage could be annulled. Little is known about what happened to either of them after this point. However, it is believed that Marguerite passed away in 1315 and Blanche 1326. As for the men in this affair, well, they met quite a gruesome fate that involved the removal of their bits and pieces before their swift execution.
Number 3. Shapeshifters. Awesome. I'm not actually Taylor, I'm someone else pretending to be. That's cool. That's why I'm so energetic today. This next theory I wish I could claim for my own again, but it was actually former BBC presenter David Icke. He takes the cake himself. Here we go. He has since revealed himself as a conspiracy theorist, and one that surrounds the royal family had me stunned. Icke and quite a few others claim that the royal family is part of the Illuminati. Yeah, and then all of them earn their power because their human ancestor mated with reptilian aliens. They were clapping alien reptilians. That's how they became royals. That's the trick. You gotta clap some reptilian alien. David says the theory actually explains why royal families are obsessed with keeping their bloodlines clean with other royals. And you know, incest. But the biggest what the part of all this has to be when David told the public that he knows people who have seen royal family members change into reptiles and then back into human form again.
In our number 2 spot today, we have King Juan Carlos. The former King Juan Carlos of Spain, when he first ascended the throne in 1975, was highly looked upon. He was said to be bringing a new age for the country, an age of democracy. His reign lasted for quite a while, but by the time 2014 rolled around, he was forced to abdicate the throne. This was due to a few reasons. Firstly, his public ratings started to plummet after word spread of him being a bit of a womanizer and after an explosive affair, but also because of a lavish elephant hunting trip he took in the middle of an economic collapse. Okay, fair enough, I can see why people were getting their guard up a bit. So the king abdicated the throne in favor of his son Philippe, who sits on it to this day. During this time, however, the scandals in the family weren't only to do with Juan Carlos. In January of 2014, another of his children, his daughter Infanta Cristina, was charged with tax fraud. She has since been acquitted. That happened in 2017, but she was stripped of her title as the Duchess of Palma de Mallorca, and this whole deal had her leaving Spain and moving to Switzerland. The drama doesn't end here, however, because her husband actually was convicted in the case with charges that included embezzlement, fraud, and tax evasion, and he received prison time in 2018. In the end, none of the fraud charges have ever been linked back to the former king, but this entire debacle did cause the former ruler to move out of Spain. With his move came a letter, part of which read, quote, "Guided by the conviction to perform the best service to the Spanish people, their institutions, and you as king, I am communicating my thoughtful decision to move at this time outside of Spain. A decision I make with sadness, but with great serenity. I have been king of Spain for almost 40 years, and during all of them I have always wanted the best for Spain and for the crown." In our number 1 spot today, we have the Rothschilds. This family is easily one of the most, if not the most, powerful family in the modern era. In fact, it is said that most of us in the Western world don't even realize the impact this family has had on our lives, as our consumer-driven lifestyle is definitely directly related to the monetary systems this family put in place. This would include the United States Federal Reserve. Because of this insane amount of money and power that this family has held for over a century, there are plenty of conspiracy theories going on surrounding them. The conspiracies run deep, and they go quite dark. They touch on everything from assassination attempts, some successfully completed on sitting presidents, to heinous World War II agendas that would have benefited the family. Of course, they are conspiracies, so no one is quite sure which of these secrets, if any, are true. Even still, the stories and speculations swirl today, waiting for some piece of evidence to maybe bring them to light.
For example, Tennessee Williams, who became famous for airing his family's dirty laundry on Broadway, being derided by critics and blacklisted by the Roman Catholic cardinals, who condemned his scripts as revolting, deplorable, morally repellent, and offensive to Christian standards of decency. And if he didn't have the terrifying family life that he did, he wouldn't have changed and challenged the course of Broadway. His mother's continual search for the perfect nuclear family life, his sister's debilitating schizophrenia, as well as his father's heavy drinking, abusive, and sometimes criminal nature, caused them to move around numerous times around in the St. Louis areas, locations that he would later use as inspiration for his work. And like the famous characters Blanche and Stanley from A Streetcar Named Desire, he was troubled and self-destructive, an abuser of substances like his father, and trying not to take his own life was a long-term struggle due to the trauma he had experienced. The character of Blanche is believed to be based off of his own sister Rose, who was diagnosed with schizophrenia alongside a few other mental disorders when she was in her early 20s. Williams witnessed how her illness weighed her, but also never forgave his parents for forcing a prefrontal lobotomy on her, now largely discredited as a medical treatment, and it incapacitated Rose for the rest of her life. Anguish over his sister's fate and his traumas took its toll on Williams' health. He battled depression for most of his life, and in 1969 he was hospitalized by his brother. After his release from the hospital in the 1970s, Williams wrote a few other plays, a memoir, poem, short stories, and a novel. In 1975 he published Memoirs, which detailed his life and discussed his addiction as well as his homosexuality. It'd only be a few years later before he's found and alone in a hotel room. You've heard about these guys on our channel before, the Boleyns, aka history's Nepo babies. See, starting with Daddy Thomas Boleyn, this noble spent his career sucking up to King Henry in order to wedge his kids all up in there. An insane decision as a parent, seeing as King Henry was known for chopping heads off of ladies. First, Mary is tossed his way, but like Seinfeld in that Roommates episode, Henry wants the other one, Anne Boleyn. As Henry's obsession with Anne grew, so did Thomas's standing in court, and some have speculated that he pressured his daughter to insist on wedding the king, who was already married at the time. Henry says, "Don't worry about that, baby, I got this," and literally subverts and rewrites a religion to divorce his initial wife Catherine and marry Mistress Anne, effectively establishing a new church of which he became the head and changing the course of history. 3 years after the controversial marriage in 1535, Anne, having failed to produce a male heir, was also accused of adultery with not one but 5 men, one of them being her own brother. Oh, and also plotting the king's assassination, and she fell out of favor. So her head got to fall off her body, classic history style. Anne's brother George had already been executed for his alleged involvement with Anne's treasonable plot, and her sister Mary long since banished for having married for love. Their father Thomas lost his position as Lord Privy Seal and died a few short years later. And everyone knows the cons. You have to expect them in this list, honestly. Even if you've heard about them 1,000 times, these guys manage to take the cake in so many categories of terrible that they just tend to circulate discussions regarding history. So, there is Genghis Khan, founder of the vast Mongol Empire, who was a visionary warrior and leader, rising to power after successfully uniting all nomad tribes of Northeast Asia to dominate the green steppes of Mongolia. In 1206, juices flowing and feeling good about the invasion expansion stuff so far, he proclaimed the Mongol Empire and called himself Genghis Khan, the universal ruler, and moved to attack China and literally anywhere else he could find, expanding his empire to 12 million square miles of territory. Genghis and his sons also waged major wars on 2 fronts simultaneously and conquered Russia in winter, both feats that eluded the also short and angry men Napoleon and Adolf. Before he died, Genghis Khan ordered his sons to split the empire in multiple khanates that would continue to push the boundaries of the empire. At the peak of its glory with his sons, it occupied most of Eurasia, spreading from Austria to Korea and from South Siberia to the Himalayas. The Great Khan's descendants conquered nearly everything of interest, turning the Mongol Empire into the largest territory in history. Genghis Khan's grandson, Kublai Khan, founded the Yuan dynasty in 1271, which then later ruled China until 1368. Maria the Mad comes in at number 7 of our countdown. She was just 16 years old when she became the Princess of Brazil and the Duchess of Braganza, then their queen following the passing of her father. Brazil changed from just a Portuguese colony to a large kingdom. Brazil, the Algarves, and the United Kingdom of Portugal are 3 famous formations recorded under Maria the Mad and her son. After the death of the queen's husband/uncle in 1786, however, there was a noticeable decline in her mental health. 1788 saw the passing of her daughter, newborn son, and her closest confidant. By 1792, after the passing of her eldest son a year prior, Maria seemed to be experiencing combined symptoms of hallucinations, depression, and anxiety, all resulting from mass traumatic losses. It evolved to later include religious mania and melancholia. She started avoiding court gatherings and social or royal obligation. It was then her treatment went to Dr. Francis Willis, who tried straitjacketing, blistering, and ice baths, none of which were helpful for obvious reasons. After treatment for more than 5 years, he declared the disease was incurable. By 1792, Maria was no longer a capable ruler and deemed insane. Courts pushed her son John to take over the government ruling, but he delayed until he finally took the throne in 1799 for a truly tragic reason. There was just no longer any possibility that his mother would ever recover her senses. If the nickname Maria the Mad wasn't already taken, then this next Maria named monarch would have snatched it up. Get ready for a whole lot of Ivans. It's Ivan the Terrible and the Terrible family. Just kidding, their last name isn't Terrible. Or is it? I'm a history host, I should know. Anyways, I think what made this family terrifying was being part of it, because Ivan, the first Tsar of Russia, had a complex personality that contributed to his famous behavior and his nickname. Intelligent yet prone to outbreaks of uncontrollable rage from a young age, he faced constant threats from usurpers to his throne after the deaths of both of his parents on his 8th birthday. After his wife's death, Ivan sank into a depression that inspired a 24-year-long reign of terror. After he seized absolute control, Ivan slayed any noble who spoke against him. He allegedly even blinded the architect of the St. Basilia Cathedral so that he could never create another building as beautiful, which is dramatic, sure, but it's also hell of a compliment to your work. His 9 children suffered through years of abuse at his hands. In 1581, he attacked his pregnant daughter-in-law as a punishment for wearing revealing clothing, and the woman unfortunately lost her baby. Ivan's son, Ivan, finds out what his dad did to his wife and is justifiably pissed, so he confronts him. His dad had already banished his first 2 attempted marriages, now he did this? Come on! Well, Daddy Ivan classically loses it, but went a little too far, and he smacked his kid on the head with a scepter. It kills him, and it essentially sets the clock for a political crisis known as the Time of Troubles, that began with the extinction of the Rurik dynasty upon the infamous Friarda's death in 1598, and the depopulation of Russian provinces from Tartar incursions.
Number 5. Alexander the Great. The son of Philip II and heir to the Macedonian throne, Alexander was the star child, and while it's true it may have gone to his head, he did make it work for him. The spoiled prince became king at 20, which is very young in case you were wondering, and during his youth would create one of the largest empires the earth would ever see. He was undefeated in battle and likely one of, if not the best, military strategist of all time. More than 20 cities were founded in his name, including the great city of Alexandria in Egypt. I don't have any cities named after me, but I do have a cool nickname though. Do I want my own empire? Sure, why not? The Cheddar Empire sounds pretty sick. Nice, the Cheddar Empire, I like that. Do I want all the naughty war related stuff that he did? No, I don't want that. I don't like that. I'm thinking more like a comedy empire, stand-up tours, movies, and of course merchandise. That's how you know it's real, folks. You get quotable t-shirts, that's how you know it's real. Don't sniff your own farts, that's a good t-shirt. Some of you would wear that, I know you would.
Maybe Smooth Criminal was written because the family was full of them, the Jacksons. Oh yeah, you guys, I'm going there. This family is a disaster and I will die on this hill. So let's break it down. Since the early 80s, it's been one thing after another. The plastic surgery gossip, Sister LaToya's claims of what she and Mike went through as kids, allegations that were settled out of court in 1994 that Mike had maybe not done some so great things himself. Who better to marry Elvis's daughter? Joe Jackson, former boxer and failed blues musician, his main skill appeared to be devising innovative ways to make his children's lives miserable. Once you knew what Michael Jackson's childhood and early career had been like, the issue wasn't so much why he was apparently turning out so weird, but how it hadn't happened sooner. Even without their father's aggression, the Jacksons still would have dealt with their weird-ass mama. A devout Jehovah's Witness, she had them pore over the Watchtower illustrations of imminent Armageddon for funsies, and she would wash them with rubbing alcohol, making a family of extreme germaphobes. The Jackson 5, as they were to become, were not allowed to play outside with other children. They rehearsed for 5 hours a day after school, and their enthusiasm was incentivized by the fact that if they got a dance step wrong, their father would order them to break a branch off the tree in the garden for a switch. You guys remember that Community episode? In his 40s, Michael was still telling reporters that the thought of his father made him nauseous. The most recognizable name on our our list is Marie Antoinette, who is number 3 in our countdown. Married at only 14, Marie was known to have lived an opulent lifestyle, but there was a lot of conspiracy and debate about the young woman. She was performing what she knew her royal duties to be, and she was known for not always being the most educated. She started the trend of riding donkeys and the worldwide trend of feathered/stuffed bird hats. She even once had an entire miniature village created with functioning shops so that she and other elites may dress like commoners and experience living lower status. Marie was misguided and young, but she was also the victim of an incredible smear campaign. She was accused of having ulterior motives constantly, supplying the Austrians with military plans or siphoning millions of livres of treasury money to Austria. It was the tales of sexual deviance that were the most damaging though, alleged to have had orgies, laid with commoners, or even have sex with her own ladies-in-waiting. Her most offensive accusal was thrown at her in trial before her famous decapitation, where she was accused of committing indiscretions with her own child, Louise Charles. With such a vast array of accusations against her, not one of which was supported by any concrete evidence, the trial was a formality, conceived merely as a step towards completing the revolution. Marie Antoinette was declared guilty and executed only hours later at the age of 37. Let's look at self-sabotage to the max. Wan Li, the 13th emperor of China's Ming Dynasty, had 2 official concerts and a whole bunch of B-words. That's a fun way to say he had a lot of concubines. His mother was Empress Dowager Li, once an imperial maid who had no political resources to manipulate. She worked her way up to empress, where she developed a romantic relationship with Zhang Zhuzhang, who was an extraordinary prime minister and reformers in ancient China and brought about the last great reign of the Ming Dynasty. She trusted him to teach the young Wan Li, and when Zhang passed away, he left a great empire with efficient management system, wealthy and stable civilians, peaceful borders, and no threatening enemies. Once, the Wan Li emperor slept with a maid and had an heir, but then homeboy fell in love with the imperial concubine named Zhenge. Now, his mama pitied Service Wang and forced Wan Li to give her the royal title, thus the heir to the throne. Wan Li said, "Nah, I want Zheng's baby, my second son, to be the heir." This controversy lasted for 15 years, countless intense debates were conducted, and over 300 intelligent officials were resigned, demoted, put to death, or exiled. But the emperor's ministers wouldn't stand for his son, Wan Li's third, as heir, and Wan Li was forced to declare his first son by the consort, Lady Wang, as the crown prince. So, he stopped working. For the last 20 years or so of his reign, he was like a modern-day politician. Feet kicked up, head in the clouds. In a passive-aggressive protest, Wan Li spent decades ignoring meetings, memorandums, and other royal duties. Unsurprisingly, this undermined the country. Many historians attribute this to the crumbling of the Ming Dynasty in 1644. And last on the list, the tale of 2 brothers. In 1527, the Inca king Huayna Capac died and decided to just leave his kingdom to his 2 sons, Atahualpa and Huascar, to duke it out in a serious family meltdown moment. The 2 men had different mothers, as Inca rulers took multiple wives and concubines, so they tried the dual leader thing, but they just couldn't see eye to eye. They did what any disagreeing adults do. In 1529, a war broke out. Things got personal. Atahualpa apparently at one point drank out of the skull of one of his bro's generals. This Inca civil war would hurry along the downfall of the great civilization and aid in the erasure of its history, because in 1532, Francisco Pizarro's Spanish conquistadors arrived to erase some history and culture, and they appeared right as Atahualpa was declaring victory over his brother who he'd captured. Pizarro invited the Incan ruler to come down to the great square of Cajamarca. Because he didn't know how the whole colonizer thing went down, Atahualpa agreed and brought 80,000 people with an unarmed inner retinue to show goodwill. Meanwhile, the Spanish had armed men hidden everywhere, and a friar from the Spanish side offered the leader a Bible, which he didn't even know how to open or read. When asked to accept Christianity, he didn't, because a stranger was offering him something he couldn't understand. Because he refused, the Spanish jumped out of hiding and attacked the unarmed contingent. Atahualpa was captured and eventually executed, though not before he was able to get out an important order to his people during his capture. Don't forget to execute my brother.
Number 10, Prince Harry. Rotten. Off with something familiar. Prince Harry. I feel like this man needs no introduction, especially if you were watching the news, say, around circa 10 years ago. The now married and humble prince was quite the partier back in the day. I'm sure our editors can find a safe for work image out there somewhere. A couple wild parties in beautiful Las Vegas had the royal family a little concerned, and when people say they're a little concerned, it means they're really concerned. At one party, he was stark naked. What? I know, right? It was weird. I kind of remember that actually. And another where he was wearing a certain uniform from a certain time in Germany that would raise a few hands and eyebrows. You know what I'm saying? Thank goodness he's cleaned up though. He's doing a lot better now and he's married to the very beautiful Meghan Markle. Listen, Meghan, if it doesn't work out, you call me. You and I, we'll make it happen. You and I. A great husband. I'll help. Number 9, Prince Edward VII. The spoiled prince's spoiled prince. He's a man who had everything just given to him. The poster boy for silver spoons. Being the son of Queen Victoria comes with benefits. The second Eduardo was born, he automatically became a prince, a duke, and an earl of a couple of titles. In comparison, when I was born, it was a cold Canadian morning, and my family was watching through a glass screen at a brand new sweet babe. When one of my family members was holding a double-double said, "Why does he have 3 arms?" I'm just kidding, I don't have 3 arms, but the point I'm making is that I, like many others, simply weren't born into the good stuff. We had to do this thing called work. I know, right? It sucks. Edward lived a life of luxury until becoming king in the early 1900s. The only thing I've been king of is the playground. And that's just because I was big and I pushed everyone off. This isn't my slide. I don't think you get off. Number 8, Prince Charles. Alright, put your tinfoil hats on here, folks. We're going right into it. Okay, so Prince Charles, son of Elizabeth. It's the 1980s. Life is good. Ladies' formal wear has padded shoulders for some reason. Eddie Murphy is wearing red leather, and Milli Vanilli is an acceptable art form and not a fever dream of the past. Good times. So Prince Charles does the most 80s thing ever and marries the most beautiful princess ever to grace us mortals. I mean, come on, look at her. She was gorgeous. So it makes sense that you'd want to leave the most beautiful princess in the whole world after having 2 kids, right? Okay, but how? How do you leave Princess Diana? How about perhaps, maybe, kind of, sort of, might have been plausible that Prince Charles organized her car accident, which resulted in her passing. For him, Princess Diana was a warm-up. Oof. For others, she was an inspiration and a conversation starter for middle-aged women across the Midwest.
Do you remember where you were when Princess Diana passed away? I do. I was eating cheese at the kitchen table.
Stories like this one are the reason there's so many period dramas set in England. It is royal sibling rivalry. Before Meghan and Harry and all of their stuff, there were other scandals. But some forget about the brothers, George III and Edward, the Duke of Windsor. So, in the 1920s, George is married and a career naval officer, while his brother Edward, why, he's Prince of Wales, salacious fiend, and international sex symbol. The bleep hit the fan when the buzzkill George learns his brother Edward is shaking it up with Wallace Simpson, who is divorced twice. He snitches to Daddy, who makes a comment about, "When I'm dead, the boy will ruin himself in 12 months. Anyways, so he manifests that and he dies, and Edward is the oldest, so he's tossed on a throne hot plate. He says, okay, but can my girlfriend come? Seeing as being king literally means he's the head of the Anglican Church, which has a no-no grounds on divorce, he was forbidden that. So by 1936, Edward is miserable. He misses his boo and the fun life, and only about 325 days into his reign, he abdicates to George. Immediately after abdication, he becomes a gold digger divorcee. Wallace was never granted her HRH title, so Edward decided to spam call his little brother, asking for that and money, even though he had a loaded bank account. Meanwhile, George is busy trying to become a new king during the start of the Second World War. So, since they also felt so snubbed by British royalty, Wallace and Edward decided to party with the Yahtzees during the start of World War II. That's a bad time if there were ever not one. At one point, Edward straight up hangs out with Adolf, so in 1940, as fears in England grew of Edward's apparent bestie ties with the enemy, he was offered governorship of the far-off Bahamas. The Duke begrudgingly accepted, he was forced, and was shipped off, and not allowed to return for a very long time. What's crazy is even as his brother was dying, Edward pestered him while he was on his deathbed to give Wallace the HRH title and money still.
Number 6, the Tsar. Being a prince turned king is hard. It's even harder to be a czar. I'd ask Nicholas II, but he ain't around anymore. Being a wealthy czar for a people that majority of don't have anywhere close to the same luxuries as the rest of Europe is even harder. There's a lot of things that can be said about the czar, especially his negligence for the Russian people. However, one event kind of sums up the whole thing. Imagine for a second if you were a poor Russian serf, working day and night for nothing, when all of a sudden a new czar says, "Come on down, folks, I know you're hungry, come enjoy some fresh hot pretzel and perhaps some beer." Since this was the best food a lot of people were going to have for a very long time, people rushed the grounds, and this stampede left over 1,000 people lifeless on the fairgrounds. The Tsar's response to his little strategic mistake? Party with the French royalty and not acknowledge his poor planning that had caused a major catastrophe. Oh, how many people? Hey, let's go party, come, let's go, hey.
Number 5 may have not gone mad, but it was her favorite emotion, Empress Anna of Russia. She is remembered as a horrible and spiteful child with a cruelty streak. Young Anna was reported to be mannerless and vulgar. So when her father, who experienced a stroke shortly after her birth that left him handicapped, passed away, her very traditional mother attempted to raise her in classic elements of strict religious femininity, so she may be a quiet and obedient woman. Anna had other plans. She hunted animals, kept guns and swords, and terrorized other children as well as the commoners. This behavior was all a massive red flag for some of the crazy things she'd do later in life when granted power and the means. Anna's only husband ever was Frederick Williams, who at their reception indulged a little too heavy on alcohol and gave him a hangover so wicked that 3 days later he just died. In 1730, her uncle Peter the Great passed. The Privy Council turned her into the Empress of all of Russia since she was widowed and childless, which was assumed to cause less trouble. The joke's on them because she turned around and immediately abolished the Supreme Privy Council and re-established the autocracy. Now, she had the sole power, and while she made some serious political waves, Anna also made some strange choices. She has a serious vendetta with Peter the Great's daughter Elizabeth, her cousin. Elizabeth was a better looking, younger, and also a rival for her throne. So she ruined her life. No nobleman could marry Elizabeth. If Elizabeth chose a commoner, the Empress would strip her of her titles and her claim to the throne. When Anna found out about Elizabeth's side piece, the unhinged Empress ordered her men to cut out his tongue and exiled him to Serbia. Anna even woke up one morning and decided to force Prince Mikhail to marry her lower class older maid as a joke. After the ceremony wrapped up, Anna placed the Prince, Mikhail, and the maid in a cage, dressed them as clowns, and paraded them on top of an elephant to an ice palace she had constructed for their honeymoon. In the extreme cold of Russia, she reportedly advised them to get to doing the dirty with each other if they wanted to keep their bodies warm enough to stay alive. Maria Eleonora wasn't the only queen who couldn't give up on a dead relationship, pun intended.
Number 4, Suleiman the Magnificent. The prince turned sultan, Suleiman the Magnificent of the Ottoman Empire, probably the most famous of all the sultans, and for having a really big hat. For real, that's a big boy. That's a big boy right there. No, he's actually known for taking the Ottoman Empire that was good and making it great, plunging it right into a golden era. Successful military campaigns and some law reforms made him stand out. Speaking of standing out, is his collection of ladies of the evening. This is the bad part, where it stated that he had 17 personal ladies to service the mighty royal in his time of need. Yes, this did produce offspring, and yes, this did make things confusing for who is next in line.
So dramatic it needs its own movie, and it actually has some. K-drama worthy King Sukjong. This Korean lineage is captured in movies The Fatal Encounter and The Eternal Empire, so if any K-drama fans are watching, maybe jump on those. King Sukjong was a pretty fickle dude, and he didn't take much to fall out of his favor. His first wife, Queen In Hoyeon, ticked him off, so he banished her. Then he married a side piece, Lady Jang. Her promotion led to a bloody conflict known as the Jizi Sawa, which resulted in the Sauron faction taking power and her son, Gyeongjong, named Crown Prince. After a bit, the king started liking his next son, Yeojan's mother, Lady Choi. Lady Choi was an open supporter of the previously banished old queen, and the king didn't need much convincing other than that. He demoted Jang, banished her and her brother, and then he brought back the original queen. Meanwhile, Yeojang's older brother, was king. He was sickly and heirless, so just in case, Yeojang was made the royal prince successor to handle the state affairs. Yeojang takes the lead once his brother finally kicked the bucket. During his 52-year reign, Yeojang accomplished a number of important reforms in various fields including political organization, culture, and industry. Born in 1735, his son Prince Sado was bullied by him a lot. He'd publicly humiliate him and abuse him. Sado suffered from delusions and nightmares from the age of 10, and things just got worse as he grew up. His constant quest to impress his father drove him to madness. this. His reaction to losing his stepmother and grandmother in the same month sent him over the edge. To say he didn't take it well would be a gross understatement. He beat the eunuchs, he killed palace staff, he bagged a nun somehow, tried to seduce his own sister, and assaulted several ladies in waiting. In one instance, he walked into his room holding a recently severed head of an eunuch who he just killed. Then he forced anyone around to look at it, including his own wife. When his father found out what his misdeeds were, he summoned him to the court, locked him in a giant chest of rice, and after 8 days, Sato was dead. Next.
Number 2, William the Conqueror. The illegitimate child. A man who most likely would not take the throne since there were others in line. So what does William do? He says, "No, right, I'm the Duke of Normandy." That's Scottish, but we're gonna go with it. "I'm the Duke of Normandy, I don't have to take this." Thus began the Norman conquest, and conquest William did. From the Battle of Hastings to all the other lovely things Williams did, he was the spoiled prince who didn't take no for an answer. What's the lesson in this one? See things through? Or being born into an intertwining European family is complicated. Sometimes swords can solve things. Number 1. Mohammed bin Salman. Here's a modern prince for you. The crown prince of Saudi Arabia. There's a lot that can be said, but all that you basically gotta know is that the family, the royalty, is very rich. Arab oil rich. Sure, the British royal family is treated like kings and queens with servants and whatnot, but these guys, whew, they live every day like that, and it is for sure more luxurious than old Blighty. Dude's got money, it's rich. I'd love to visit though, it looks like a cool place, I don't know, we'll see.
Number 10 in our countdown is Julia Get a Grip Agrippina. When the Emperor Claudius's wife, Melissina, became entangled in an adultery scandal, the power position of the Roman Empress was suddenly wide open in the year 49. Julia Agrippina, exiled for a conspiracy against her first husband and widowed from her second that she was believed to have poisoned, concocted a scheme. In an outrageous maneuver, she seduced her own uncle Claudius to become his fourth wife. She didn't stop there, however. She then had her uncle husband make the son she had had in her prior marriage, Nero, his heir by marrying him to his own daughter from his previous marriage. Whew, now that's quite a family tree. Taking the title Augusta, she maintained a stronghold over political and household affairs, considering herself a co-ruler to her husband. After Claudius died from eating poisoned food, which is how her prior husband died, so make the connection there, Nero became a Roman emperor and would forever change Roman history in his time of rule. However, Agrippina could only hover above her son for so long, and his annoyance of her invasiveness grew. Nero chose to assassinate his mother with a trap, a boat set forth on the Bay of Naples designed to sink. But when it did, she swam ashore. Nero changed his plans and had his soldiers invade her summer home to do the deed instead. Number 9 in our countdown may be one of our most badass queens, Empress Theodora, from street busker to top dog. Syrian-born Theodora starts her journey as an actress, dancer, and mime alongside her 2 sisters in the late 400s, something she abandons by age 16 to be a mistress to a Syrian official, and she travels much of North Africa with him before his maltreatment and temper made her settle down in Egypt alone, where she took up wool spinning. It was here she met Emperor Justinian and the two fell in love, and after Justinian changed some laws so that they could marry, they began co-ruling the Byzantine Empire together. So, what made her mad, you may ask? Her ideals and the smearing that they led to through history. She was historically known for supporting religious freedoms, women's rights, and the education of the masses. Her decisions, which reflected her opinions, led to the Nicaea riots of Constantinople. She intervened and was able to persuade her husband to stay. The two successfully quelled the revolt, and in turn, she made Constantinople one of the most sophisticated cities in the world and promoted women's equity. Theodora's name appears in almost all the legislation passed during the period, and she received foreign envoys and correspondence with foreign rulers. Her husband died in 1527 AD, and Theodora took sole control of the Roman Empire. Under her reign, bridges, aqueducts, and churches were built. Theodora died of cancer on June 28, 548 AD. She and Justinian are both considered saints by the Eastern Orthodox Church. The she-wolf of France is in number 8 of our countdown. Her actual name is Queen Isabella of England, and she was famously married to the closeted Edward II. Acting as a beard to someone who doesn't love you would be hard enough, but the two did also have to produce heirs together. One would be the future King Edward III. Queen Isabella was in a desolate and lonely situation, especially as her husband's 2 male suitors, Piers Gaveston, who he gifted her jewels to, and Hugh Despenser, who was a wildly hated extortionist, were always his preferred company. So she rounded up some spiteful nobles, first killing Gaveston by beheading, and then driving Despenser from the country and redistributing his wealth. King Edward unsurprisingly was upset and sieged against those who had contributed to the death and exile of his lovers, all whilst his wife took cover in the Tower of London. It's here she met exiled British traitor Lord Roger Mortimer and started her own affair. She had him broken out and sent to France, where she later joined him and with her son, and then sent Edward a letter that essentially said, "Suck it." The anger at having been cast aside turned into burning desire for vengeance as Isabella invaded England with her new husband and army and usurped the throne, where she and Mortimer then ruled until her son came of age and had her dethroned for her violent tendencies. She died 28 years later in retirement, and Edward III later went on to rule England for 50 remarkable years.
Number 7, George V. Honestly, this one could be number 1 on the list, but it's just so strange. Okay, so for those that don't know, George V, Nicholas II, and Wilhelm II were all cousins. Who were these royals I'm talking about? Well, these are the men who were in charge of their respected empires during the early 1910s. Why is George on this list? Well, in a nutshell, George and his cousins had the opportunity to de-escalate a very chaotic political situation in Europe. Old feuds were reignited by the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, and fingers were being pointed. Fingers quickly turned into guns, and hence, WW1 had started. Not a great situation to find yourself in. WW1 was kind of a bad one. Imagine your family having the power to stop a major global catastrophe and doing nothing. Nice!
In at number 6 is Maria Eleonora of Brandenburg. Maria Eleonora was born in 1599 to Prince of Brandenburg and Anna, Duchess of Prussia. She grew up pampered, and Maria Eleonora was the it girl of the 17th century. All powerful monarchs fell over themselves to marry her. While she was dismissive of the 22-year-old Swedish king Gustav Adolphus initially, in 1620 she changed her tune as she'd apparently fallen in love with him practically overnight. And so they were married. With the king so frequently risking his life in battle, it became imperative that his wife produce a male heir, so Maria had to hanker down and focus on the baby-making business. Maria experienced 3 stillborn children consecutively before the successful birth of her daughter in 1626. It was a rare break in battle, so her husband was there to excitedly greet his daughter. Maria, however, had a very different response. Her baby was born with the condition fleece lanugo, a condition where hair covers the body of a newborn. Her infant was enveloped from its head to its knees, leaving only its face, arms, and lower legs visible. Maria was horrified, claiming to have birthed a demon, and rejected her daughter for the decade to come, even after losing her husband in 1632 Battle of Lutzen. And while everyone mourns their own way, it's easy to say Maria really took it up a notch. She forced their daughter to sleep in blacked out rooms and reportedly hung King Gustav's heart in a golden casket on the ceiling above the bed, making the girl sleep directly under her father's blessed remains. In 1633, Maria Eleonora returned to Sweden with her beloved's embalmed body. She refused to bury Gustav for more than a year, reportedly embracing and caressing the decomposing king. Maria's story continues to become more demented with time, and her daughter grows to become her caretaker, especially when troublesome Maria runs away to Denmark permanently and her daughter's left to become the queen and pay her mom's allowance to Danish royals. Awkward. How keeping it in the family literally started a war and an empire downfall. Charles II and his family tree. The 17th century wasn't a great time to be a peasant. Agricultural production dropped, famine destroyed communities, and epidemics swept across Europe. But peasants were still better off than the Spanish Habsburgs in one important way. They weren't literally killing themselves off from intentional family activities. Charles's father, King Philip III, was only 10 years old when his parents arranged his first marriage, which resulted in 8 children. After the death of his first wife, Philip remarried his own niece and had 2 daughters and 2 more sons who died as children. Between 1527 and 1661, the year that this dumpy potato called Charles was born, the Spanish royal families produced 34 children. Nearly 30% of them died before the age of 1, and a full half died before their 10th birthday. But poor leadership from the Habsburg also contributed to this country's issues and declines. The countries needed a functioning king and governing system, and there was literally zero. The monarchy took on an enormous amount of debt while funding a multitude of war efforts in both Europe and the Americas and struggling with inflation. The king was simply unable to rule his kingdom, which would never again reach the heights of the 16th century. He couldn't speak, he was incapable of walking, his body and functions were all deformed, he couldn't even really be a human being. It was clear that Charles wasn't going to live long and he had no children of his own, so in 1700, Charles issued his last will and testament. In the doctorate, Charles chose Philip, Duke of Anjou, but instead of a smooth succession, Charles's death led to the War of the Spanish Succession that dragged on from 1701 until 1713. Number 4 is Joanna of Castile. Never meant to be a princess, let alone a queen, Joanna earned her title and nickname Joanna la Loca through unfortunate means. She had 2 older siblings, Isabella, who passed in 1498, and Joan in 1497. Joanna's mother, the formidable Catholic monarch Isabella I of Castile, passed away in 1504. This left the throne of Castile and Leon to Joanna when her father passed in 1517. Joanna had started exhibiting signs of mental instability in 1504 when her mother had been sick. She was struggling to eat or sleep and having outbursts of anger. One such example was when she wished to go see her husband in Flanders. The journey would take her through France, which Castile were at war with at the time. When she was prevented from leaving for Flanders, 24-year-old Joanna flew into a rage. Perhaps one of Joanna's most notable displays of mental instability occurred when her husband died in 1506. Joanna refused to part with her deceased husband's remains for a disturbingly long time, reportedly opening the casket to kiss or embrace him. I'm seeing a pattern here with some of these women. While pregnant, Joanna traveled with her husband's body from Burgos to Granada, a distance of 668 kilometers, which would take around 6.5 hours to drive in a car today. And talk about a romantic imbalance. While she did all of this posthumously, when her husband Philip was alive, he talked Joanna's madness to anyone that would listen and completely discredited the woman. In 1509, Joanna was placed in the royal monastery/convent of Santa Clara in Tostillas, Castile, by her son Charles, who also forbade Joanna to have any visitors until her passing.
Number 3. Mansa Musa. Nothing says spoiled like being the richest man of the ancient world. Maybe even of all time, actually. A royal who rose to power and exploited his nation's salt and gold mines, which in return made him quite wealthy. Net worth is estimated to be in the $400 billion range, but it could be a lot more. We're not sure. I don't know about you fine folks, but when I get some extra cash in my pocket, just itching to get out there, I go head down to the mall. Sure, mall culture isn't what it used to be from the 80s, but I gotta hit up the Gap, man. Good sales. But that's exactly what Mansa Musa did. However, he went to multiple cities, and when he went shopping in said cities, he spent so much money that he upset the economy of said city. That's just such a baller move, dude. Damn, alright. Okay.
Speaking of sexual deviance, meet Queen Ana Nzinga, who is number 2 in our countdown. Queen of what's now known as present-day Angola, Ana took the crown when her brother passed away. Being Queen of Angola was hard work. Ana managed to keep the Portuguese invaders out for over 40 years alone. So how would you, a tough and titanous queen, decompress? Why, by building a harem, of course. Ana collected the men she found to be the most attractive warriors in her region, keeping a harem of 50 to 60 men close at hand for whenever she, well, wanted to romp in the sack. Spending a great deal of her time strategizing around battlefield in men's apparel, some historians wonder if that's why she required the men in her harem to dress as women. Now, Ana didn't have time to deal with picking who she was gonna sleep with every night, so she devised a unique system. Ana would just have the 2 men who desired her the most that evening fight to the death every night and then bed the winner. The next day, the winner still loses, as she would have them executed. Ana disbanded her harem at 75 when she took on her teenage husband, cementing her status as not only a serious badass who liberated her people and established dominance in an era of men, but also as a cougar. The next queen fought her way to the top of the countdown. Number 1 is Queen Rananavola the First. During her reign of Madagascar, Queen Rananavola the First is remembered as a dangerous tyrant who ruled her island nation with cruelty and an iron fist. Rananavola was merciless to those who tried to colonize her nation, but also to those inhabiting it. Should crimes, disputes, or discourse arise, Rananavola had a nifty trick to solve it called trial by ordeal. Both parties would be forced to ingest 3 pieces of chicken skin alongside a poison taken from a native plant, Tangena. Throw up your chicken skins and you're proclaimed innocent. Hooray! If you didn't, you were guilty and to be put to death, if the poison didn't kill you first. This trial was one of the punishments used in her persecution of Christian colonists, alongside throwing people into rock quarries and live dismemberments. Her horrific list really will go on. Rananavola was such a deadly tyrant that the queen managed to reduce her country's population from 5 million people in 1833 to 2.5 million in 1839, all through means of war, executions, religious persecution, or just settling scores. Depicted as a deranged tyrant even after her death in 1861, many have tried to repaint her image as one of a driven ruler trying to keep her culture and country independent from those trying to grow their own selfish empires.